Daniel Hayes stood frozen in his kitchen doorway, phone pressed to his ear, listening to words that made his stomach drop. "You're bringing who to the wedding?" His sister's voice was sharp with disbelief. He'd just told her he'd been seeing someone, a lie that had tumbled out to stop another round of pitying looks, and whispered conversations about how he really should move on. Now, 72 hours before the ceremony, he had no girlfriend, no plan, and a 7-year-old daughter who could spot a lie faster than he could tell one. Across town, Elena Voss was saying yes to a stranger's desperate proposal, accepting money to play a role she'd never imagined, knowing it was reckless, knowing it was necessary, and knowing absolutely nothing about the man whose life she was about to step into. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button and stay until the end. Trust me, you won't see what's coming. The coffee shop smelled like burnt espresso and desperation. Daniel Hayes sat in the corner booth, his fingers drumming against a ceramic mug he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The liquid inside had gone from steaming to lukewarm to cold, a timeline that mirrored his growing conviction that this was the worst idea he'd ever had. Worse than the time he'd tried to fix the bathroom sink himself. Worse than letting Chloe convince him she could handle a puppy. Worse, possibly, than lying to his entire family about having a girlfriend in the first place. But here he was. The ad had been simple. Almost too simple. Companion for hire. Special events, family gatherings, professional appearances. Discreet, experienced, references available. He'd found it on some forum he'd stumbled across at 2 in the morning, after the 3rd glass of whiskey and the 5th text from his mother asking if he was bringing someone special to Rachel's wedding. The bells above the door chimed. Daniel looked up, and his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The woman who walked in wasn't what he'd expected. He'd pictured someone flashy, maybe overly made up, someone who looked like they played roles for money. Instead, Elena Voss moved through the coffee shop like she belonged in a different world entirely, one with better lighting and a soundtrack. She wore a simple gray coat over dark jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency rather than style, but somehow managed both. Her eyes swept the room with the kind of awareness that made Daniel sit up straighter without meaning to. When those eyes landed on him, something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or assessment. She walked over without hesitation. "Daniel Hayes?" Her voice was lower than he'd expected, textured with something he couldn't quite name. "That's me." He stood awkwardly, nearly knocking over the cold coffee. "You're Elena?" "I am." She slid into the booth across from him with fluid grace, setting a small leather bag on the seat beside her. "You look nervous." "I am nervous." The honesty surprised him, but something about her directness made lying feel pointless. "I've never done anything like this before." "Most people haven't." She folded her hands on the table, and Daniel noticed they were steady. Completely steady. "Tell me what you need." He'd rehearsed this part, practiced it in the mirror while Chloe watched cartoons in the next room, refining the words until they sounded reasonable instead of insane. But now, sitting across from this woman who looked at him like she could see through every carefully constructed sentence, the rehearsal evaporated. "My sister's getting married in 3 days," he started. "Big wedding, 200 people. My whole family will be there, and they worry about me. My wife died 4 years ago, and since then, everyone's been waiting for me to move on, to start dating again, to prove I'm okay. And I kept telling them I was fine, that I didn't need anyone. But then my mother asked one too many times if I was bringing someone to the wedding, and I said yes. I told her I'd been seeing someone." Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "And now you need that someone to exist. For one weekend, Friday evening through Sunday afternoon, that's it. You'd need to meet my daughter, Chloe, she's 7, and you'd need to convince my family that we've been together for a few months. Nothing too serious, just serious enough that they stop looking at me like I'm broken." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "This is half. The rest when it's over. If you want references or if you need to know anything else about me, I don't need references." Elena picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "I need to know if you've thought this through, not the logistics, the emotional reality. You're going to introduce a stranger to your daughter and your family, ask everyone to believe in something that isn't real, and then make it all disappear on Sunday. Have you considered what that might feel like? For you, for your daughter, for everyone involved? The question hit harder than Daniel expected. He'd thought about the practicalities obsessively. The story they'd tell, the details they'd need to align, the exit strategy. But the feeling of it? The weight of another layer of pretending added to all the pretending he already did every day? I think about it every time my mother calls, he said quietly. Every time someone tells me how strong I am, or how well I'm doing, or how proud Sarah would be. I'm already pretending, Elena, every single day. At least this way I get to control the narrative for 48 hours. Something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a kindred wound. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. Tell me about Chloe, she said finally. The shift caught Daniel off guard. What about her? Everything. What she likes, what she's afraid of, how she'll react to me. If I'm going to do this, I need to know who I'm lying to. Daniel felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. The fact that she cared about Chloe's experience, that she saw his daughter as more than just a prop in the deception, mattered more than he knew how to express. She's smart, he said, and couldn't help the smile that crept into his voice. Too smart sometimes. She reads at a 5th grade level, loves anything with dinosaurs, and has opinions about everything. She's also protective. Of me, of her routines, of her mom's memory. She doesn't like change, and she doesn't trust easily. If she thinks you're going to hurt me, she'll know. She always knows. Does she know about this plan? Not yet. I wanted to make sure it was real first. I'll tell her tonight. Elena studied him with those dark, assessing eyes. How are you going to explain it to her? The truth, that I needed help, and you're helping me. She understands deals. We have a deal that she feeds her fish every morning, and I make her favorite pancakes on Saturdays. This is just another kind of deal. Except deals with children are built on trust, Elena said softly. And this one involves asking her to lie to her family. I'm not asking her to lie. I'm asking her to let me handle the adults while she just exists. She's good at that. But even as he said it, Daniel felt the wrongness of it settle in his stomach like a stone. Elena was quiet again, her gaze distant, as if she were looking at something beyond the coffee shop walls. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a strange mixture of resignation and determination. I'll do it, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. 1. I meet Chloe before Friday. If she's uncomfortable, the deal's off and you keep your money. 2. You tell me the truth. About your wife. About your family. About anything I need to know to make this believable. No sanitized versions. 3. When it's over, clean break, no contact afterward. Can you agree to those terms? Daniel felt the weight of each condition, the way they pushed against the boundaries he'd carefully constructed around his life. The idea of talking about Sarah with a stranger made his chest tighten, but Elena wasn't wrong. Half-truths would show. And the clean break? That should be easy. That's what he wanted anyway. Agreed, he said, extending his hand across the table. Her handshake was firm, her skin warm. The contact lasted only seconds, but Daniel felt it longer than he should have. Tomorrow, Elena said, releasing his hand and standing. 6 o'clock, your place or somewhere Chloe feels comfortable. Text me the address. She was halfway to the door before Daniel found his voice. Elena? She turned, one hand on the door handle. Why did you say yes? You asked me if I'd thought this through, but have you? For the first time since she'd walked in, Elena smiled. It was small, almost sad, and it transformed her face completely. Let's just say we all have our reasons for playing pretend, Daniel. See you tomorrow. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with cold coffee and the distinct feeling that he'd just set something in motion he didn't fully understand. That evening, Daniel stood at Chloe's bedroom door, watching her arrange her dinosaur collection in what she insisted was scientifically accurate chronological order. She'd been at this for 20 minutes, her small face scrunched in concentration as she moved a plastic triceratops 3 inches to the left. Chloe Bear? She looked up, her brown eyes, Sarah's eyes, bright with focus. Daddy, did you know that Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus Rex never actually met? They lived millions of years apart. Ms. Peterson told us today. I did not know that. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, the springs creaking under his weight. That's pretty cool. It's very cool. She set down the triceratops with careful precision. What's wrong? What makes you think something's wrong? Chloe gave him the look, the one that made him feel like she was the adult, and he was the child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. You're doing the thing where you smile but your eyes don't. And you're sitting on my bed, which means it's a talking thing, not a tucking in thing. Daniel felt his careful opening speech dissolve. 4 years of single parenting had taught him that Chloe had a built-in detector for bullshit, and trying to ease into difficult conversations only made things worse. You're right, he admitted. I need to talk to you about something, about Aunt Rachel's wedding. Chloe's expression shifted to something wary. Do I have to wear the dress with the scratchy tag? Because I told you, no, it's not about the dress. We fixed the tag, remember? He took a breath. Do you remember how Grandma kept asking if I was bringing someone to the wedding? She asks that every time she calls. She's very nosy. Chloe stated this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting the weather. Well, I told her I was bringing someone. A woman I've been seeing. Chloe's eyes widened. You have a girlfriend? Why didn't you tell me? Because it's complicated, sweetheart. The truth is, I don't have a girlfriend. I just said I did because I wanted Grandma to stop worrying. But now I need to make that true for the wedding weekend. The confusion on Chloe's face was immediate and complete. I don't understand. How do you make a girlfriend true if she's not real? I hired someone. Her name is Elena, and she's going to pretend to be my girlfriend for the wedding, just for a couple days. Then it goes back to normal. Chloe was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently touching the triceratops. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than before. Are you going to marry her? What? No, honey, no. It's just pretend, like playing house, or when you pretend your dinosaurs can talk. It's not real. But why? The question came out almost as a whisper. Why do you need a pretend girlfriend? Daniel felt the familiar ache in his chest, the one that came every time he had to explain the adult world's sharp edges to his daughter. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Because sometimes grown-ups worry about things they shouldn't worry about. And Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Rachel, they worry about me, about us. They think I should be dating, that I should be moving on, and I just wanted them to have one weekend where they didn't have to worry, where they could focus on Aunt Rachel's wedding instead of whether I'm okay. But you are okay. Chloe said it with such certainty that Daniel almost believed it himself. I am. We are. But they don't always see it that way. So Elena is going to help us show them that everything's fine. You'll meet her tomorrow, and if you don't like her, we don't have to do this. Your vote is the only one that matters. Chloe picked up the triceratops and turned it over in her hands, examining it from every angle. It was her thinking pose, the one she adopted when processing information that didn't quite fit her understanding of how the world worked. What if I like her? She asked quietly. What happens then? The question lodged somewhere in Daniel's throat. He hadn't considered that possibility, that Chloe might actually connect with Elena, might start to imagine something that couldn't exist beyond Sunday afternoon. Then we still say goodbye on Sunday, he said gently. This is just for the wedding, Chloe Bear, just a weekend. Like when we rented the bounce house for my birthday? Exactly like that. But even as he said it, even as Chloe seemed to accept the explanation and return to her dinosaur arrangement, Daniel felt the inadequacy of the comparison. Bounce houses didn't smile at you. They didn't ask questions or make you feel seen. They didn't leave gaps in your life when they were taken away. He kissed the top of Chloe's head and stood to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Daddy? Yeah? If Mom were here, would you still need a pretend girlfriend? The question hit like a physical blow. Daniel turned back to see Chloe watching him with those two old eyes, waiting for an answer he didn't know how to give. No, he said finally. If Mom were here, everything would be different. Chloe nodded, satisfied, and went back to her dinosaurs. But as Daniel closed the door and walked down the hallway to his own empty bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just failed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. Elena Voss sat in her studio apartment, the envelope of cash still unopened on the table in front of her. Through the window, the city stretched out in a grid of lights and shadows, thousands of lives playing out in boxes stacked on top of each other. She'd lived here for 2 years and could count on one hand the number of times she'd spoken to her neighbors beyond polite hallway greetings. Anonymous, disconnected, safe. Her phone buzzed with Daniel's text, 4247 Maple Street. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Thank you for this. She didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd agreed to the job. The logistics would follow. Elena picked up the envelope and finally opened it, counting out the bills with practiced efficiency. $5,000. Half now, half later. It was more than she needed for this month's rent and utilities, more than enough to buy some breathing room. But as she stacked the money in neat piles, she felt the familiar hollowness that came with transactions designed to fill spaces that money couldn't reach. She'd been doing this for 18 months. Not the girlfriend thing, that was new, but the other jobs that required her to be someone else for a little while. Corporate events where she played the charming +1 for executives who needed to appear settled. Gallery openings where she pretended to be an art enthusiast on the arm of collectors who liked having someone attractive to explain pieces to. Charity galas where her job was to look elegant, make small talk, and disappear before midnight like a reverse Cinderella. It paid well. It required no emotional investment, and it kept her from having to form real connections that could become real complications. But a child. She hadn't dealt with children before. Elena walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She thought about Daniel Hayes, the nervous energy that radiated off him, the way his voice changed when he talked about his daughter, the grief that clung to him like a second skin even though he probably thought he hid it well. She'd seen enough broken people to recognize the signs, the overcompensation, the careful control, the fear of being seen as anything other than fine. She recognized it because she saw it in the mirror every morning. What if I like her? The little girl's question that Daniel hadn't asked yet but would surely come. Elena had conditions, boundaries, a clean exit strategy. But children didn't understand exit strategies. They understood presence and absence, staying and leaving, real and fake. And Elena wasn't sure anymore which category she belonged in. Her phone buzzed again. Not Daniel this time, but a reminder she'd set for herself weeks ago. Mom's birthday. Elena stared at the notification until the screen went dark, then set the phone face down on the table. Some ghosts you could outrun. Others followed you no matter how many miles you put between yourself and the past. She looked at the money again, then at her reflection in the darkened window. A woman playing pretend, taking cash to be someone else's temporary solution. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even particularly interesting, but it was what she knew how to do. Tomorrow, she'd meet a 7-year-old girl who deserved better than a rented stand-in for whatever shape hole existed in her life. And Elena would smile and be charming and make it work, because that's what she did. Then Sunday would come, and she'd walk away, and everything would go back to normal. The plan was perfect, so why did it already feel like a lie? Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of golden afternoon light that made everything look almost cinematic. Daniel spent the day in a fog of distraction, missing 2 client calls and sending Chloe to school with a lunch that contained 3 juice boxes and no actual food. His assistant, Margaret, had noticed his unusual behavior and asked 3 separate times if he was feeling well, each inquiry tinged with more concern than the last. "I'm fine," he'd insisted, which was becoming his default answer to everything. By 5:30 he was home, frantically cleaning the living room like Elena was coming to judge his housekeeping rather than meet his daughter. Chloe watched from the couch, her homework spread out around her in organized chaos. "You're being weird," she observed, not looking up from her math worksheet. "I'm not being weird, I'm just tidying up." "You cleaned the same spot 3 times. That's weird." Daniel forced himself to stop moving and set down the dust cloth. "You're right. I'm nervous." "Why? You said it's just pretend." "It is, but I still want Elena to like us. Like you, especially." Chloe finally looked up, her expression serious. "What if I don't like her?" "Then we don't do it. I told you, your vote is the only one that counts." "Okay." She returned to her math, apparently satisfied. "But if she's mean to Mr. Whiskers, she's automatically disqualified." Mr. Whiskers was the fish. A betta with flowing blue fins that Chloe had named with the kind of illogical logic only children possessed. He lived in a tank on the kitchen counter and received more attention than some people's children. That's fair, Daniel agreed. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Chloe looked up sharply, her body tensing in that way it did when routines were disrupted. Daniel squeezed her shoulder gently as he passed. Remember, just meet her. That's all we're doing tonight. He opened the door, and there was Elena. She'd changed from yesterday's practical outfit into something softer, a dark blue sweater and jeans that looked comfortable rather than calculated. She held a small bag in one hand and wore an expression that managed to be both guarded and open at the same time. Hi, Daniel said, suddenly aware of how domestic this felt, how much like an actual first date. Hi, Elena replied. Her eyes moved past him, taking in the living room and landing on Chloe. You must be Chloe. Chloe stood slowly from the couch, her dinosaur book clutched to her chest like a shield. She didn't say anything, just stared at Elena with the kind of frank, assessing gaze that made most adults uncomfortable. Elena didn't look uncomfortable. She stepped inside at Daniel's gesture and crouched down to Chloe's level, not kneeling, which would have been too submissive, but lowering herself enough to meet the child's eyes directly. Your dad told me you're an expert on dinosaurs, Elena said. Is that true? I know a lot about them, Chloe replied carefully. What's in the bag? Elena smiled, and Daniel was struck again by how it transformed her face. Would you like to see? Chloe nodded, curiosity overcoming caution. Elena opened the bag and pulled out a book, not wrapped, not presented with ceremony, just offered simply. The Princeton Field Guide to Dinosaurs. Daniel recognized it as the expensive hardcover edition he'd shown Chloe once in a bookstore, the one she'd spent 40 minutes reading before carefully putting back on the shelf. Chloe's eyes widened. This is the one with all the skeletal diagrams. And updated classifications based on recent discoveries, Elena confirmed. I wasn't sure what you already had, but your dad mentioned you were serious about dinosaurs, so I figured I should bring something serious. Chloe took the book with careful hands, her fingers tracing the cover. Daniel watched his daughter's defenses crack in real time, the way they always did when someone treated her interests with respect instead of patronizing amusement. Thank you, Chloe said softly. Then, with characteristic directness, Are you really going to pretend to be my dad's girlfriend? Elena didn't hesitate or deflect. Yes, if that's okay with you. Why would you do that? Don't you have a real boyfriend? I don't. And I'm doing it because your dad asked for help, and I'm in a position to help him. Sometimes grown-ups need to make things easier for their families, even if it means bending the truth a little. Bending the truth is the same as lying, Chloe stated. You're absolutely right, Elena agreed. It is. And your dad and I talked about that. We're asking you to go along with something that isn't completely real because we think it will make this wedding easier for everyone. But if you're not comfortable with that, we won't do it. Deal's off. Chloe looked at her father, then back at Elena, then down at the dinosaur book in her hands. Daniel could practically see the calculations running behind her eyes, the way she was measuring honesty against motivation, risk against benefit. Will you answer my questions? Chloe asked Elena. True answers, not fake ones. Any question you want to ask, anytime you want to ask it, Elena promised, even if it's about stuff grown-ups don't like talking about. Especially then. Another long moment of consideration. Then Chloe nodded once, decisive. Okay, but I need to show you Mr. Whiskers first. If he doesn't like you, the deal's off. Elena's lips twitched. That seems fair. Lead the way. As Chloe walked toward the kitchen, Elena caught Daniel's eye. He mouthed thank you, and she gave a small shrug that suggested this was just part of the job. But Daniel saw something else in her expression. Relief, maybe, or the tentative beginning of connection. In the kitchen, Mr. Whiskers swam lazy circles in his tank, oblivious to his role as judge and jury. Chloe pointed him out with the pride of someone presenting royalty. He's beautiful, Elena said, and it didn't sound like a platitude. How long have you had him? 8 months. Daddy got him for me after I had a really bad day at school. Chloe pressed her nose to the glass. I was sad about something, and he said everyone deserves something beautiful that's just theirs. Daniel felt his throat tighten at the memory, Chloe crying in the car about kids asking why she didn't have a mom like everyone else, his own helplessness in the face of her pain, the desperate trip to the pet store because he didn't know what else to do. Elena glanced at him, and in that glance, Daniel saw understanding. Not pity, understanding. The recognition of what it meant to try to fill unfillable spaces with gestures that never quite fit. "Mister, Whiskers is lucky to have you," Elena said to Chloe. "Not everyone gets taken care of by an expert." "I read 3 books about bettas before we got him," Chloe explained. "You have to know things to take care of things properly." "You're absolutely right." They stood there for a while, the 3 of them, watching a blue fish swim circles. It should have been awkward, a stranger in their kitchen, the weight of the arrangement hanging between them, but somehow it wasn't. Somehow it felt almost normal, like a moment that existed outside the transaction, outside the plan. "He approves," Chloe announced finally. "You can stay for dinner." Daniel blinked. "Chloe, it's okay, Daddy. She needs to know what we're like if she's going to pretend to like us. And we're having spaghetti, which is good practice food because if you can't eat spaghetti without being messy, you're not trying hard enough." She looked at Elena seriously. "That's not a rule. That's just a fact." Elena laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. "I'll try my best to live up to the standard." An hour later, they were sitting around Daniel's small dining table, plates of spaghetti in front of them, and something that felt dangerously close to comfortable settling over the scene. Chloe had insisted on showing Elena her entire dinosaur collection, complete with detailed explanations of each period and species. Elena had listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions that suggested she was actually absorbing the information rather than just being polite. So the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event wasn't just about dinosaurs, Chloe was explaining, gesticulating with her fork in a way that made Daniel nervous. It wiped out about 75% of all species. But some things survived. Birds, some mammals, crocodiles. Life found a way. "Life found a way," Elena repeated softly, something in her voice catching on the words. "That's from Jurassic Park," Chloe said. But Dr. Malcolm was right. Things survive even when everything says they shouldn't. Daniel watched Elena's expression shift, watched her absorb the weight of a 7-year-old's wisdom delivered through dinosaur facts. When her eyes met his across the table, something passed between them, a shared recognition of how children could say the truest things without knowing they were doing it. After dinner, while Chloe brushed her teeth, Daniel and Elena stood in the living room, the evening winding down toward goodbye. "She's remarkable," Elena said quietly. "She is. Takes after her mother that way." The words came out before Daniel could stop them, and he waited for the usual awkwardness that followed any mention of Sarah. But Elena just nodded. "Tell me about her. Your wife. Sarah." "Why?" "Because if I'm going to pretend to be part of your life, I need to understand what that life contains, including the parts that hurt." Daniel sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want to know?" Elena sat in the chair across from him, her posture attentive but not invasive. "How you met? What she was like? How she died? Whatever you're willing to tell me." For a moment, Daniel considered deflecting, offering the sanitized version he gave to acquaintances who asked polite questions. But Elena's words from the coffee shop echoed back, "No sanitized versions." "We met in college," he began, "art history class that I only took because I needed the credit. She was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, and she raised her hand to argue with the professor about the interpretation of a Rothko painting. She was passionate about it. Not aggressive, but absolutely certain that everyone else was missing the point. After class, I told her she was right. She said of course she was right, and did I want to get coffee and discuss all the other things she was right about?" A small smile crept onto his face despite the ache in his chest. That was Sarah, confident, brilliant, warm. She made everything feel possible. When Chloe was born, she was terrified and excited in equal measure. She read every parenting book, made lists, planned everything. And then Chloe arrived, and none of the plans mattered, but Sarah adapted. She was always adapting, always finding ways to make life work. "How did she die?" Elena asked gently. "Aneurysm. She was putting Chloe down for a nap. I was at work. She called me, said she had a terrible headache, and then..." His voice cracked. "By the time I got home, the paramedics were already there. She was unconscious. She never woke up." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things that couldn't be said, all the unfairness and random cruelty of a life cut short for no reason at all. Chloe was 3, Daniel continued, old enough to know something was wrong, too young to understand death. I had to learn how to be enough for both of us, mother and father, comfort and stability. And most days, I'm still not sure I'm doing it right. You're doing it right, Elena said with unexpected certainty. How would you know? Because Chloe feels safe enough to be herself. That doesn't happen by accident. Daniel looked up, meeting Elena's eyes, and found something there he hadn't expected. Not pity, but respect. Recognition of what it cost to keep showing up when the grief never really left. Your turn, he said. You made me promise honesty. I think that goes both ways. Elena's expression shuddered immediately, her walls slamming back into place. My life isn't relevant to this arrangement. Maybe not, but Chloe's going to ask you questions, personal ones, and I'd rather you have answers ready than improvise. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing patterns on the arm of the chair. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. I grew up in New York, only child. My mother was a concert pianist, not famous, but respected. My father left when I was 8. Mom remarried when I was 12 to someone who seemed perfect on paper. He wasn't perfect. He was controlling, manipulative, and very good at making sure no one outside the house saw the real him. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Elena, I left for college and never went back. My mother chose him over me. We haven't spoken in 6 years. She said it flatly, like reciting facts from someone else's life. I put myself through school with jobs like this, playing roles at events, being whoever people needed me to be. It turned out I was good at it, good at reading people, adapting, becoming what was required, so I kept doing it. And the people in your life, real relationships? Elena's laugh was sharp and humorless. People want the version of me they hire. When they realize there's nothing underneath but more performance, they lose interest. So I stopped trying to convince them otherwise. I don't believe that, Daniel said quietly. You don't know me. No, but I know my daughter, and she's an excellent judge of character, and she liked you immediately. That tells me there's something real underneath all the performance. Elena stood abruptly, as if the conversation had crossed a line she needed to reinforce. I should go. We should meet again before Friday to align our story. Thursday evening? Daniel recognized the deflection for what it was, but didn't push. Thursday works. Here again? Around 7? I'll be here. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Daniel, what you're doing, protecting Chloe, trying to give your family peace, it's not wrong. But make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. What's the wrong reason? Avoiding the work of actually moving forward. She opened the door. I'll see you Thursday. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with the echo of words that cut too close to truths he'd been avoiding for 4 years. Upstairs, Chloe called out, Daddy, is Elena gone? Yeah, sweetheart, she left. I like her. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his daughter's simple declaration and all its complicated implications. Me too, he whispered to the empty room. That's the problem. Wednesday morning arrived with rain that turned the streets silver and made the world feel smaller, closer. Daniel drove Chloe to school through traffic that crawled, their windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the downpour. In the passenger seat, Chloe clutched her new dinosaur book, already a third of the way through despite having received it less than 24 hours ago. Elena's smart, Chloe said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence they'd maintained since leaving the house. She is, Daniel agreed, navigating around a delivery truck double-parked in the loading zone. And she didn't treat me like a baby. Most grown-ups do that. They use their special kid voice and ask dumb questions like, what's your favorite color, instead of actually talking. Elena seemed to understand that you prefer real conversations. Chloe nodded, her fingers tracing the embossed title on the book's cover. Do you think she's sad? The question caught Daniel off guard, his eyes flicking from the road to his daughter's face. What makes you ask that? She smiles with her mouth, but not always with her eyes. Like you do sometimes. Like when Grandma calls and asks if you're okay, and you say yes, but your yes voice is different than your regular voice. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. 7 years old, and Chloe could read people like sheet music, seeing the notes beneath the melody. He wondered what that kind of perception cost her, how much of childhood's protective ignorance she'd lost to being too observant, too aware. "I think Elena might be sad sometimes," he said carefully, "but that's her story to tell, not mine to guess about." "Will she tell me if I ask?" "She might. She promised to answer your questions honestly, remember?" "Yeah." Chloe was quiet for a moment, watching the rain streak across the window. "I hope she does. It's lonely being the only one who notices things." They pulled up to the school, joining the line of cars inching toward the drop-off zone. Daniel reached over and squeezed Chloe's hand, feeling the smallness of it in his palm, the fragility and strength existing in the same space. "You're not the only one," he said softly. "I notice things too." "I know. That's why we're good at taking care of each other." She unbuckled her seatbelt and gathered her backpack. "Are you seeing Elena again before Friday?" "Tomorrow night. We need to get our stories straight so your grandparents believe we've actually been dating." "You should tell them you met at the grocery store," Chloe suggested with the confidence of someone who'd clearly given this thought. "That's normal and believable. And you should say you like her because she's kind to me. Grandma will like that part." "When did you become a relationship expert?" "I read a lot." She opened the door and Rain immediately spotted her jacket. "Bye, Daddy. Don't forget I have art club after school, so pickup is at 4:30, not 3. "Got it. Love you, Chloe Bear." "Love you too." She slammed the door and ran toward the school entrance, her backpack bouncing, the dinosaur book pressed protectively against her chest. Daniel watched until she disappeared inside, then sat in the idling car, rain drumming overhead, thinking about his daughter's observation. Elena was sad. He'd seen it too, in the careful way she controlled her expressions, the walls that went up the moment conversations turned personal. And Chloe, with her two old eyes and pattern recognition brain, had spotted the kinship immediately. Birds of a feather, he thought. 3 people performing normalcy for an audience that expected nothing less. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Can we meet today instead of Thursday? Something came up for tomorrow evening." Daniel typed back, "Sure, when and where? Lunch, there's a place called Marion's on 5th, noon?" He hesitated, thinking about the client presentation he was supposed to be prepping for. The emails piling up in his inbox, the work he'd been neglecting since this whole arrangement began. Then he thought about the wedding in 2 days and the ticking clock that wouldn't slow down for his schedule. "I'll be there." Marion's turned out to be one of those neighborhood places that looked like it had existed forever, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore, with a faded awning and windows that fogged with kitchen steam. Daniel arrived 5 minutes early and found a booth near the back, watching the door while pretending to study the menu he wasn't actually reading. Elena walked in at exactly noon, shaking rain from her dark hair, and Daniel felt that same jolt of recognition he'd experienced in the coffee shop. She moved through the restaurant with purpose, sliding into the booth across from him with the kind of economy of motion that suggested she never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. "Thanks for switching days," she said, shedding her coat. "I have something Friday morning that I can't move." "No problem." Chloe suggested we should say we met at a grocery store, by the way. Apparently she's consulted her research and determined that's the most believable origin story. Elena's mouth curved into a smile. "She's not wrong. Grocery store, coffee shop, bookstore, anywhere that doesn't scream we're trying too hard." "What else has she advised?" "That I should tell my family I like you because you're kind to her. She thinks my mother will appreciate that detail." "Smart kid." Elena picked up her menu, scanning it quickly. She's going to go far if she keeps thinking strategically like that. A waitress appeared, took their orders, soup and sandwich for Daniel, salad for Elena, and disappeared back into the kitchen noise. In the sudden quiet, Daniel found himself studying the woman across from him, trying to reconcile the professional facade with the glimpses of something raw underneath. "How much do we need to coordinate?" he asked. "The story, I mean. How detailed does it need to be?" Elena pulled out her phone and opened a notes app, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Detailed enough that we don't contradict each other, loose enough that it feels natural. Timeline. We met 3 months ago. Location, grocery store works fine. Which one do you usually go to?" "Morrison's on Grant Avenue." "Perfect." We reached for the same box of pasta, made small talk. You asked for my number. I said yes. First date was coffee. Second date was dinner at an Italian place you'd been wanting to try. After that, we started seeing each other regularly. Once, sometimes twice a week. You've been to my apartment. I've been here. Chloe knows about me, likes me, and we've had dinner together several times. She said it all in a rapid-fire delivery that suggested she'd done this kind of preparation before, breaking down a fictional relationship into bullet points and fact-checking details. Daniel felt a strange discomfort at how clinical it sounded, how easily intimacy could be reduced to a timeline and a list of coordinated lies. What do I do for work in this story? Elena continued. Because your family will ask. What do you actually do besides this? She hesitated, and Daniel saw the calculation behind her eyes. How much truth to offer, how much to withhold. I'm a freelance translator, mostly technical documents, some literary work. Spanish, French, Italian. It's solitary, flexible, and it pays well enough. That's perfect. You can tell them that. It's true, it's interesting, and it explains why you have an irregular schedule. And what about your work? What should I know? I'm a software consultant. Boring, technical, hard to explain at parties. I help companies optimize their systems and processes. It means I work from home a lot, which has been good for Chloe's schedule. My company is called Hayes Solutions, which sounds more impressive than it is. It's basically just me and Margaret, my assistant, and a handful of contract developers I bring in for bigger projects. Elena typed notes as he spoke, her focus absolute. Parents? Linda and Robert Hayes. Married 42 years, live in Westchester, retired. Dad was a high school principal. Mom was a nurse. They're good people. A little traditional, a lot worried about me, very invested in making sure Chloe has a normal life, whatever that means. My sister Rachel is 30, works in marketing, getting married to Tom Chen, who's a decent guy. Quiet, steady, exactly what Rachel needs. The wedding is at the Rosewood Estate, black tie, 200 guests. My family is taking up a whole floor of the hotel. And they don't know about this arrangement. No one does except Chloe, and even she doesn't know all of it. Elena set down her phone and looked at him directly. What don't you want them to know, Daniel, besides the obvious fact that I'm paid to be here? He leaned back against the vinyl booth, feeling the weight of the question. That I'm not as okay as I pretend to be. That some days, getting Chloe to school and making dinner and answering emails feels like climbing a mountain in the dark. That I still sleep on one side of the bed because the other side feels wrong to touch. That I'm terrified I'm failing my daughter by not being able to give her what Sarah would have given her. The confession came out rawer than he'd intended, bypassing all his usual filters. In the overhead lighting of a neighborhood diner, with rain still falling outside and the smell of grilled onions drifting from the kitchen, Daniel had just admitted truths he'd never said out loud. Elena didn't look away, didn't offer platitudes or reassurances. She just held his gaze and nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. My mother used to tell me that the truest thing about a person is what they're afraid of, she said quietly. You're afraid of failing Chloe. I'm afraid of becoming my mother. We all carry our specific terrors. What happened with your mother? Daniel asked. You mentioned she chose your stepfather over you, but what does that actually mean? Their food arrived, giving Elena a moment to gather her thoughts. She picked up her fork, moving lettuce around her plate without eating it, and Daniel recognized the gesture as a stalling tactic. He waited. He was charming, she finally said. Martin. Everyone loved him. He was successful, attentive, generous with gifts and public displays of affection. To the outside world, we looked like a perfect blended family. Behind closed doors, he needed to control everything, what my mother wore, who she talked to, how she spent her time. And slowly, so slowly you almost didn't notice it happening, he started doing the same to me. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Did he hurt you? Not physically. Martin was too smart for that. He was a master of psychological warfare. Little comments that eroded your confidence. Gaslighting that made you question your own reality. Isolation that felt like protection. When I tried to tell my mother what was happening, he'd already laid the groundwork. I was a troubled teenager, acting out, trying to drive a wedge between them. She believed him. Jesus, Elena. I left for college on a full scholarship and cut contact. She called once, about 3 years ago. to tell me they were renewing their vows. Asked if I'd come home, be part of the ceremony, show everyone we were a family. I said no. She said I was being selfish and cruel, that I'd regret not having a relationship with her when she was gone. Maybe she's right, but I can't. I can't go back to pretending everything's fine when it never was. The parallel wasn't lost on Daniel. Both of them, in different ways, were experts at performing normalcy while carrying weight that never got lighter. Both of them using this arrangement to avoid dealing with the actual work of healing. Is that why you do this? He asked. These jobs, playing roles for money, because it's safer than trying to build something real? Elena's eyes flashed with something sharp. Is that why you hired me? Because it's safer than actually dating? The words hung between them, accusation and truth braided together. Daniel felt them land, felt the sting of recognition. Probably, he admitted. Yeah, probably. The honesty seemed to disarm her. Elena set down her fork and pushed her barely touched salad aside. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people so committed to protecting ourselves that we've designed an entire relationship specifically to avoid vulnerability. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty pathetic. It is pathetic. It's also understandable. She paused, then added quietly, and temporary. Sunday comes, and we both go back to our separate, carefully controlled lives. No harm, no foul. But as she said it, Daniel heard the hollowness in her voice, the lack of conviction. And he wondered if she believed it any more than he did. They spent the next hour going through details. Favorite foods, pet peeves, the small intimacies that couples knew about each other. Elena learned that Daniel was a terrible cook, except for breakfast foods, that he listened to jazz when he worked, that he'd once had a dog named Biscuit, who died when he was 12, and he'd never gotten another one because the loss had gutted him. Daniel learned that Elena was fluent in 4 languages, had lived in Paris for a summer during college, that she'd wanted to be a pianist like her mother until her stepfather's presence had made practicing in the house unbearable. By the time they left Marion's, the rain had stopped, and the city smelled like wet concrete and possibility. They stood on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to say goodbye, despite the lunch meeting having accomplished its purpose. Chloe asked me this morning if I thought you were sad, Daniel said. Elena's expression flickered. What did you tell her? That you might be, but it was your story to tell. She said she hopes you'll answer if she asks, because it's lonely being the only one who notices things. She said that? Elena's voice was soft, almost wondering. My daughter sees too much. It's a gift and a curse. No, Elena said firmly. It's just a gift. The world needs people who notice when other people are hurting. There's already too much polite blindness. They stood in silence for a moment, the afternoon stretching around them, the city moving at its relentless pace while they remained still. I'll see you Friday morning, Elena said finally. What time do you want to leave for the hotel? 11. It's about an hour's drive and check-in starts at 1. The welcome reception is at 6. I'll be at your place by 10:30. That gives us time to load the car and for Chloe to give me any last-minute instructions on how to behave. Daniel smiled despite himself. She's already informed me that if you can't eat spaghetti without being messy, you're not trying hard enough. I'm sure she has opinions about wedding etiquette, too. I look forward to her coaching. Elena started to walk away, then turned back. Daniel, thank you for being honest today. About your fears, about why you're really doing this. It helps. Helps with what? Understanding what I'm stepping into, who I'm supposed to be. She zipped up her coat against the wind that had picked up. I'll see you Friday. This time when she walked away, Daniel didn't call her back. He watched until she turned the corner, then headed to his own car, his mind churning with the conversation, with all the things they'd said and all the things they'd carefully avoided saying. That evening, after picking up Chloe from art club and sitting through a detailed explanation of her painting of a velociraptor, they had feathers, Daddy, the movies get it wrong. Daniel found himself standing in his bedroom, staring at the closet that still held half of Sarah's clothes. He'd meant to sort through them years ago. His mother had offered to help. His sister had gently suggested that holding on to everything wasn't healthy. Even his therapist had mentioned that creating space might help him move forward. But Daniel had never been able to do it. The clothes were proof that Sarah had existed, that their life together hadn't been a dream he'd imagined. His hand hovered over a blue cardigan Sarah had loved, soft cashmere that she'd worn constantly in the months before Chloe was born. He touched it gently, feeling the fabric beneath his fingers, and waited for the familiar surge of grief. It came, but quieter than before, more like an ache than a breaking. "Daddy?" He turned to find Chloe in the doorway, her dinosaur pajamas slightly too short in the legs, her hair damp from the bath. "Hey, sweetheart. Ready for bed?" "Yeah. Are you looking at Mommy's clothes?" There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. Daniel had always been honest with Chloe about grief, about the fact that missing someone didn't follow a schedule or rules. "I was thinking maybe it's time to pack some of them away," he said carefully. "Not throw them out, just make some room." Chloe walked into the closet and stood next to him, so small beside the hanging garments. She reached up and touched the blue cardigan. "I don't remember her wearing this," she said softly. "You were too young, but she loved it. She wore it the day we brought you home from the hospital. Can we keep this one, and the red dress, and her coat with the buttons?" "We can keep whatever you want." Chloe nodded, satisfied. "The rest can go to people who need them. Mommy would like that better than them just hanging here." The simplicity of a 7-year-old's logic cut through years of Daniel's paralysis. Of course, Sarah would want her clothes to be useful rather than preserved like museum pieces. Of course, holding on to everything wasn't honoring her memory. It was trying to hold on to a past that couldn't be held. "You're right," Daniel said. "We'll sort through them this weekend, after the wedding." "Okay." Chloe started to leave, then paused. "Daddy, is Elena going to help us feel less sad?" The question landed hard. Daniel knelt down so he could look at his daughter directly. "No, honey. Elena's just helping us get through the wedding without everyone worrying about us. She can't fix sad. No one can fix sad except time, and even then, it doesn't really go away. It just becomes part of who we are." "But maybe it's okay to have new people anyway," Chloe said, "even if they can't fix things. Maybe they just make things a little less lonely." Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. How had he raised someone so wise? Or had Sarah's DNA coded this kind of emotional intelligence into their daughter, a final gift from a woman who'd understood people better than anyone he'd ever met? "Maybe you're right," he whispered into Chloe's hair. "Maybe that's enough." Later, after Chloe was asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking and his laptop open to a browser he wasn't using. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "So excited to finally meet this mystery woman. Rachel says you've been very secretive about her. I hope that means she's special." Daniel stared at the message, his finger hovering over the keyboard. He could still back out, could tell his mother the truth. There was no girlfriend. He'd panicked. He wasn't ready. She'd be disappointed, but understanding. Rachel would be annoyed, but would get over it. Life would continue exactly as it had been. Safe, controlled, lonely. He thought about Elena's question at lunch. "Is that why you hired me? Because it's safer than actually dating?" Yes. Because dating meant risk, meant opening himself up to the possibility of loss again, meant allowing someone into the life he'd carefully reconstructed around the hole Sarah had left, meant being vulnerable in ways that terrified him more than any physical danger ever could. But what was the alternative? Chloe growing up watching him go through the motions, never taking chances, never modeling what it looked like to choose hope over fear? Daniel typed back to his mother. "She is special, you'll see." It wasn't quite a lie. Elena was special, just not in the way his mother imagined. He closed the laptop and carried his untouched beer to the sink, pouring it out, watching the amber liquid swirl down the drain. Through the window, he could see the neighbor's light still on, shadows moving behind curtains, other lives being lived in other houses. The world was full of people making choices, taking risks, building and losing and rebuilding. And here he was, hiring someone to fake a relationship because the real thing felt impossible. Friday morning arrived faster than Daniel expected, bringing with it a sky so blue it looked artificial and a knot of anxiety in his stomach that no amount of coffee could dissolve. He'd packed their bags the night before, his own, Chloe's, with her input on which stuffed animals qualified as essential wedding companions. Now he moved through the house in a fog of nervous energy, checking and rechecking things that didn't need checking. "You're doing the thing again," Chloe observed from her spot at the kitchen table, where she was eating cereal with careful precision, making sure each spoonful had the exact right ratio of flakes to milk. "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend to be busy, but you're really just anxious. You cleaned the coffee maker twice. It doesn't need to be cleaned twice." "I'm not anxious. I'm just making sure everything's ready." "Daddy?" Chloe set down her spoon and gave him the look, the one that said she could see right through him. "It's okay to be nervous. This is a big pretend." "I'm a little nervous too." Daniel abandoned his unnecessary organization and sat down across from his daughter. "What are you nervous about?" "What if I forget it's pretend? What if I start thinking Elena's really going to stay, and then she leaves and I feel sad?" The fear was so honest, so raw, that Daniel felt his chest constrict. He reached across the table and took Chloe's small hand in his. "That's a real possibility," he said carefully. "And if it happens, we'll deal with it together. But remember, we're going into this knowing it's temporary. Elena's been clear about that from the start. She's helping us for the weekend, and then she goes back to her life, and we go back to ours." But what if her life and our life could be the same life? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Couldn't explain to his 7-year-old daughter that some things were too complicated, too risky, too impossible to even consider. That Elena was a stranger who was good at playing roles. That whatever connection felt like it was forming was probably just part of the performance. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:30, saving him from having to respond. Chloe jumped up, her earlier nervousness apparently forgotten, and ran to answer it. Daniel followed more slowly, steeling himself for whatever the next 3 days would bring. Elena stood on the porch in dark jeans and a soft green sweater, a weekend bag slung over her shoulder, looking simultaneously prepared and uncertain. When Chloe threw the door open, Elena's face transformed into a genuine smile. "Hi, Chloe. Ready for this adventure?" "I have my dinosaur book and Mr. Whisker's travel tank and my good dress and my emergency snacks," Chloe reported. "Daddy says I overpack, but I think he underpacks. He only brought 2 shirts for 3 days." "I brought 3 shirts," Daniel corrected, reaching for Elena's bag. "Let me take that." "I can manage," Elena said, but handed it over anyway. She stepped inside, and Daniel caught the scent of something subtle. Not perfume, but maybe shampoo or lotion, something clean and faintly floral. "We should leave in about 10 minutes, Daniel said, checking his watch. "Traffic might be heavy heading north." "I'm ready when you are." Elena looked around the living room, and Daniel tried to see it through her eyes, the comfortable but worn furniture, the photographs of Sarah still on the walls, the evidence of a life that had been built for 3 but now functioned with 2. "Nice place." "It's home," Daniel said simply. They loaded the car with a choreography that felt almost domestic, Daniel handling the heavier bags, Elena helping Chloe secure Mr. Whisker's tank in the back seat, everyone moving around each other with careful courtesy. When everything was packed and they were finally on the road, Chloe in the back with her book and Elena in the passenger seat, the reality of what they were about to do settled over Daniel like a weight. 3 days of pretending. 3 days of convincing his family that he'd moved on, that he'd found someone new, that he was healing in all the ways they wanted him to heal. 3 days of lying to everyone who loved him. Elena must have sensed his tension because she reached over and touched his arm briefly, a gesture so quick it might have been accidental, but Daniel felt the warmth of it linger. "It's going to be fine," she said quietly, too low for Chloe to hear. "We've got this." Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that they could pull this off without consequences, without damage, without anything breaking that couldn't be fixed. But as he merged onto the highway, heading north toward the Rosewood estate and his sister's wedding and 3 days of careful performance, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd set something in motion that was already beyond his control. In the back seat, Chloe had abandoned her book and was watching the landscape blur past her window. Daniel caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, Chloe Bear?" She nodded slowly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how pretending something is different from it being real, but sometimes if you pretend something long enough, maybe it starts to feel real anyway. Is that bad?" Elena turned in her seat to look at Chloe, and Daniel saw something complicated pass across her face. Concern, understanding, recognition. I don't think it's bad, Elena said carefully. I think it's human. We all do it sometimes. The important thing is remembering which is which. But what if you forget? Chloe asked. What if you forget which is real and which is pretend? Neither adult had an answer for that. The question hung in the air as they drove north, carried along by momentum and the choices they'd already made, heading toward a weekend that promised to test exactly where the line between performance and truth actually fell, and whether that line would hold. The Rosewood estate emerged from behind a corridor of oak trees like something from a different century, all white columns and manicured gardens, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones and everything cost more than it should. Daniel felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel as they pulled into the circular drive, joining a line of luxury cars that made his practical sedan look apologetic. Wow, Chloe breathed from the back seat, her face pressed against the window. It's like a castle. It's where people with too much money get married, Daniel muttered, then caught Elena's amused glance and added, Sorry, I'm not great with ostentatious displays. Neither am I, Elena said quietly, but we're not here for us. We're here for Rachel. The valet appeared before Daniel could respond, opening doors with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they were standing in the marble-floored lobby, surrounded by other early arrivals, the air thick with expensive perfume and the kind of laughter that came from open bars and old money. Daniel felt immediately out of place, like he'd wandered onto the wrong movie set. Daniel! His mother's voice cut through the ambient noise like a beacon. Linda Hayes materialized from a cluster of relatives, her face bright with excitement, arms already extended. She enveloped Daniel in a hug that smelled like her signature lavender lotion, then immediately released him to study Elena with undisguised curiosity. You must be Elena, Linda said, and Daniel heard the weight of expectation in those 4 words. We've heard so much about you. You have? Elena's surprise sounded genuine. Daniel didn't mention that he'd been talking about me. Oh, he's been very tight-lipped, actually, which only made us more curious. Linda's smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. I'm Linda, this secretive man's mother. It's wonderful to meet you, Elena said, extending her hand, but Linda ignored it and pulled her into a hug instead, the kind that marked territory and claimed ownership. Daniel watched his mother embrace a woman she'd met 30 seconds ago and felt the weight of the deception settle more heavily on his shoulders. This was his mother, kind, well-meaning, desperate for him to be happy. And he was lying to her face. And Chloe Bug! Linda released Elena and crouched down to her granddaughter's level. Look at you. You've grown 3 inches since I saw you last month. That's scientifically impossible, Grandma, Chloe said seriously. The average growth rate for a 7-year-old is 2 to 3 inches per year, which means I could only have grown 0.16 inches in 4 weeks. Linda laughed and kissed Chloe's forehead. Always my little scientist. Come on, let me show you all to your rooms. Robert's upstairs dealing with some crisis about the seating chart, but he'll be down soon. We've got the whole 3rd floor. Rachel wanted family close. They followed Linda through corridors that belonged in architectural magazines, past sitting rooms and libraries, oil paintings of landscapes that probably cost more than Daniel's car. Chloe walked close to Elena, occasionally reaching out to touch her hand, and Elena let her, their fingers tangling together naturally. Daniel noticed his mother noticed, saw the soft smile that crossed her face. Here we are, Linda announced, stopping at a door. Daniel, you and Elena are in the Gardenia suite. Chloe, sweetheart, you're in the connecting room. There's a door between them, see? You can go back and forth whenever you want. Daniel froze. Wait, what? Linda looked confused. The Gardenia suite. I made the reservation weeks ago. You said you were bringing someone, so I assumed... Understanding dawned on her face, followed by embarrassment. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have asked. Do you need separate rooms? I can call down and... It's fine, Mom, Daniel said quickly, seeing the path of least resistance and taking it before his brain caught up with his mouth. It's fine. The suite is perfect. Are you sure? Because I can easily... Linda, it's beautiful. Elena cut in smoothly, her hand finding the small of Daniel's back in a gesture that looked effortlessly familiar. Thank you for thinking of everything. Linda beamed, crisis averted. Wonderful. Get settled and come down to the terrace around 5:30. We're having cocktails before the welcome dinner. Very casual, just family. She squeezed Daniel's arm. I'm so glad you're here, honey, both of you. Then she was gone in a swirl of efficient energy, leaving the three of them standing in the hallway, staring at a door that led to a room they'd have to share. Daddy and Elena are going to sleep in the same room? Chloe asked, her voice carefully neutral in that way that meant she was processing rapidly. Looks like it, Daniel said, running his hand through his hair. But it's fine, we're all adults here. Elena and I can figure it out. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a space that was less hotel room and more small apartment. A sitting area with plush furniture, a king-sized bed with more pillows than any two people could need, French doors opening onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens. And yes, a connecting door to a smaller but equally luxurious room where Chloe's bags were already waiting. Dibs on the room with the window seat, Chloe announced, darting through the connecting door with the resilience of childhood, apparently satisfied that the sleeping arrangements were a grown-up problem that didn't require her input. Daniel and Elena stood in the gardenia suite, carefully not looking at the bed that dominated the room. I can sleep on the couch, Daniel said finally. It looks comfortable enough. Don't be ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share a bed without it being weird. But Elena's voice carried a slight tension that suggested she found it at least a little weird. Are you sure? It's one weekend, Daniel. I think we can manage. She moved to the windows, looking out at the gardens, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Your mother seems nice. She is nice. That's what makes this harder. Daniel set their bags down near the dresser. She's been worried about me for 4 years. All she wants is to see me happy, and I'm using her concern to justify lying to her. You're not lying maliciously. You're trying to give her peace of mind. Is there really a difference? Elena turned from the window, and her expression was complicated, understanding mixed with something that might have been regret. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe we're both just good at rationalizing our choices. Before Daniel could respond, Chloe reappeared in the connecting doorway. There's a bathtub in my bathroom that has jets. Jets, Daddy? Can I use it? After dinner, Daniel promised. Right now, we need to unpack and get ready for the cocktail thing. Do I have to wear the fancy dress already? No, that's tomorrow for the wedding. Tonight is casual, remember? Chloe nodded and disappeared again, apparently satisfied. Daniel could hear her talking to herself in the other room, likely narrating her unpacking process to an audience of stuffed animals. She's handling this better than I expected, Elena observed. Chloe's adaptable. She's had to be. Daniel opened his bag and started hanging clothes in the closet, needing something to do with his hands. After Sarah died, everything changed overnight. New routines, new normal, just the two of us figuring it out. She learned early that flexibility was survival. That's a lot of weight for a 3-year-old to carry. Yeah, but she's strong. Stronger than me, probably. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching him work. Then she said, You know, for someone who claims he's not doing well, you've raised a remarkably well-adjusted child. That doesn't happen by accident, Daniel. That's you showing up every day, even when it's hard. Give yourself some credit. He stopped mid-motion, a shirt half hung on a hanger. Why do you do that? Do what? Say things that make me feel seen. We barely know each other. Maybe that's why I can see you clearly. I don't have 4 years of history telling me who you're supposed to be. I just see who you are right now. She moved to her own bag and started unpacking with efficient movements. And right now, you're a father who loves his daughter enough to put himself through something uncomfortable to spare his family worry. That's not nothing. Daniel wanted to argue, to deflect, to retreat behind the walls he'd carefully maintained. But standing in this too expensive hotel room with a woman who'd agreed to pretend to love him, he found he didn't have the energy for his usual defenses. Thank you, he said quietly. Elena glanced at him, and something passed between them, a moment of genuine connection that had nothing to do with the arrangement they'd made. Then she smiled, breaking the tension. Come on, let's get through tonight. How hard can cocktails with your family be? The answer, it turned out, was very hard. The terrace had been transformed into something from a magazine spread, string lights overhead, cocktail tables scattered artfully, waiters circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that were too small to be satisfying but too pretty to refuse. Daniel's extended family had descended in force, a sea of faces that blurred together in Daniel's anxiety. aunts, uncles, cousins he saw once every few years, all of them eager to meet the mysterious girlfriend. Daniel, my favorite nephew! His Aunt Patricia swooped in, drink already in hand, her enthusiasm amplified by what was clearly not her first glass of champagne. And this must be the girl who's finally got you back in the game. Elena, this is my Aunt Patricia. Patricia, Elena Voss. Charmed, absolutely charmed, Patricia grabbed Elena's hand and pumped it enthusiastically. Tell me everything. How did you two meet? Daniel's been so secretive, we were starting to think he was making you up. Elena handled it with grace that looked effortless. We met at a grocery store, actually. Very mundane beginning for what's turned into something special. A grocery store. How wonderfully normal. And what do you do, dear? I'm a translator. Freelance work, mostly technical documents, but some literary pieces. How fascinating. What languages? Spanish, French, Italian, and some Portuguese. Patricia looked genuinely impressed, and Daniel felt a weird surge of pride, despite knowing this was all performance. Elena was good at this, reading people, giving them what they needed, becoming exactly the right person for the moment. The questions continued, a relentless barrage from various relatives. How long had they been dating? What were her intentions? Was it serious? Did Chloe like her? Each question landed with weight, and Daniel watched Elena field them all with practiced ease, never contradicting their prepared story, never faltering in her role. Across the terrace, he spotted his father deep in conversation with Tom, the groom-to-be, and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly stole his breath. Robert Hayes was a good man, honest, straightforward, the kind of person who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. What would he think of his son hiring someone to lie to the family? You okay? Elena's voice was low, meant only for him. She'd somehow extricated them from Aunt Patricia and guided him to a quieter corner of the terrace. Just thinking about how many people I'm lying to. You want to stop? We can stop right now. Tell them I got food poisoning, take me back to the hotel room, and you can come clean. Daniel looked at her surprised. You'd be okay with that? Losing half your payment? I'd be okay with you not torturing yourself. Her eyes were serious, searching his face. This was supposed to make things easier, not harder. If it's not working... Daniel! His sister Rachel appeared, radiant in a white sundress, her happiness so palpable it seemed to glow around her. There you are. I've been dying to meet Elena. She didn't wait for introductions, just pulled Elena into a hug that was all genuine affection and bridal excitement. I'm Rachel. I'm so glad you're here. Daniel never brings anyone to family things, so this is huge, huge. Congratulations on your wedding, Elena said warmly. Everything looks beautiful. Doesn't it? Tom and I wanted something elegant but not stuffy, classic but personal. Rachel linked arms with Elena like they were already friends. Come on, I need to steal you for a minute. Girl talk. She whisked Elena away before Daniel could intervene, leaving him standing alone on the terrace with a glass of champagne he didn't remember accepting. He watched his sister guide Elena toward a group of bridesmaids, all of them talking and laughing, and felt the situation slipping further from his control. That's quite a woman you've got there. Daniel turned to find his father standing beside him, drink in hand, expression thoughtful. Robert Hayes was 68, retired from decades of shaping young minds, and he had a way of looking at Daniel that suggested he saw through all the pretense to the truth underneath. Yeah, she's something, Daniel managed. Your mother's over the moon. She's been worried about you. I know. We all have been. 4 years is a long time to be alone, son. And I know you've been focused on Chloe, but you deserve happiness too. You deserve to move forward. The words were meant kindly. Daniel knew that. His father wasn't pushing or judging. He was just expressing the same concern everyone had been expressing for years, the concern that had driven Daniel to this desperate measure in the first place. Dad, Daniel started, then stopped. What could he say? That he hadn't moved forward? That he'd hired Elena because the idea of actually dating, actually risking his heart again, felt impossible? That he was standing here lying to everyone who loved him because it seemed easier than admitting he was still broken? It's okay to be scared, Robert said quietly, as if reading his son's thoughts. Sarah was special. What you two had, that kind of love doesn't come around often. But she wouldn't want you to stop living because she's gone. You know that, right? Daniel felt his throat tighten. I know, I'm trying, Dad. I really am. I can see that. Robert squeezed his shoulder. And Elena seems wonderful. The way she is with Chloe, your mother pointed it out. Very natural, very warm. That matters. Across the terrace, Daniel could see Elena surrounded by bridesmaids, laughing at something someone said, fitting seamlessly into the celebration. She caught his eye and gave a small smile, and something in his chest twisted painfully. Yeah, he said softly. It does matter. Robert excused himself to check on some detail about tomorrow's ceremony, and Daniel was left alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that this weekend was going to cost more than the money he'd agreed to pay. It was going to cost him emotionally in ways he hadn't fully calculated. Daddy! Chloe appeared at his elbow, holding a small plate piled with shrimp. These are really good. You should try them. Also, Cousin Marcus asked if Elena is going to be his new aunt, and I didn't know what to say, so I told him to ask you. Daniel groaned internally. What did Marcus say to that? He said cool and then went back to playing on his phone. Adults are weird about relationships. Kids just want to know if someone's going to be at Thanksgiving. That's very practical of you. I'm a practical person. Chloe ate a shrimp thoughtfully. Is Elena having fun? She looks like she's having fun. Daniel followed his daughter's gaze to where Elena stood animated in conversation, her hands moving as she talked, her face open and engaged. She did look like she was having fun, or she was an excellent actress, probably both. I think she is, Daniel said. Good. I like when people are happy at parties. It's better than when they're pretending to be happy, but they're really just waiting for it to be over. Chloe looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. You're in the second category, aren't you? Is it that obvious? Only to me? I'm good at reading you. It's because I pay attention. She set down her empty plate. Can I go explore the gardens? Aunt Rachel said there's a fountain with fish. Stay where I can see you from the terrace. I will. She darted off, all energy and curiosity, leaving Daniel alone again. He made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions on autopilot, until he found himself near the group surrounding Elena. Rachel was in full storytelling mode, regaling everyone with the tale of Tom's proposal. He rented out the entire botanical gardens, Rachel was saying, her eyes bright with the memory. There were string quartets hidden in the rose bushes, and when I turned the corner, there was this path of candles leading to a gazebo. And Tom was standing there with the ring, and he was shaking so hard I thought he might drop it. I was terrified, Tom interjected, appearing behind his fiancée and wrapping his arms around her waist. I'd practiced my speech for weeks, and the moment I saw her, I forgot every word. Just stood there like an idiot until I finally managed to say, "Marry me," like a caveman proposing. Everyone laughed, and Rachel turned in Tom's embrace to kiss him quickly. The love between them was so obvious, so uncomplicated, that Daniel felt it like a physical ache. That's what it was supposed to look like. Two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other. No hesitation, no fear. What about you two? One of the bridesmaids asked, gesturing to Daniel and Elena. How did Daniel propose? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Daniel's mind went blank, scrambling for an answer that made sense, but Elena smoothly stepped into the silence. Oh, he hasn't yet, she said with easy laugh. We're still in the early stages, just enjoying getting to know each other. But it's serious though, right? Rachel pressed, hopeful. I mean, you're here at the wedding. Rachel, Tom said gently, reading the room better than his bride-to-be. Let them move at their own pace. Sorry, I'm just excited. Rachel hugged Elena again. I really like you. I hope you stick around. Thank you, Elena said softly, and Daniel heard something in her voice. Was it real emotion or just very good acting? He couldn't tell anymore. The cocktail hour eventually wound down, and they moved inside for dinner, a seated affair in a private dining room with place cards and multiple courses. Daniel found himself at a table with his parents, Rachel and Tom, and Chloe, who'd been allowed to stay up past her normal bedtime for the occasion. Elena sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders occasionally touched, and Daniel was hyper-aware of every point of contact. Throughout dinner, he watched her work the table like a professional, asking his mother about her nursing career, discussing baseball with his father, engaging Tom in conversation about his work in architecture. She was charming without being over the top, interested without being intrusive, warm without being fake. Or at least, if it was fake, she was so good at it that Daniel couldn't see the seams. "I really like her," his mother whispered to him during a lull in conversation. "She's genuine, you can tell." Daniel nearly choked on his wine. Genuine. The one thing Elena wasn't being, and his mother had somehow concluded the opposite. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so deeply uncomfortable. After dinner, there was dancing. Not formal, just music and a cleared floor and people swaying to songs that ranged from classic standards to modern pop. Chloe had fallen asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, exhausted by the excitement and the late hour. "I should get her to bed," Daniel said, already standing. "I'll help," Elena offered immediately. They carried Chloe between them, Daniel holding her legs, Elena supporting her back, through the hotel corridors and up to their suite. Chloe barely stirred, deeply asleep in that complete way children managed. They got her into pajamas through a combination of gentle maneuvering and practiced efficiency, and tucked her into the bed in her connecting room. Daniel stood in the doorway watching his daughter sleep, her face peaceful, one hand curled near her cheek. Elena stood beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence. "She's lucky to have you," Elena said quietly. "I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I get up every morning, the reason any of this matters." "I know." Elena turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the hallway, her face was softer than he'd seen it. "You're a good father, Daniel. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not your family, not yourself, not the ghost of what you think you should be." The words hit deeper than they should have, finding all the places where Daniel doubted himself, where he measured his efforts and found them wanting. "How do you do that?" he asked. "How do you see the things I don't say?" "Because I'm looking, really looking. Most people don't." She moved away from the doorway, back into the main room, and Daniel followed, pulling Chloe's door mostly closed. They stood in the gardenia suite, the evening's performance finally over, just the two of them in a space that suddenly felt too intimate and not intimate enough. The bed loomed between them, a physical reminder of the pretense they were maintaining and the reality they were avoiding. "I should change," Elena said, grabbing clothes from her bag and disappearing into the bathroom. Daniel used her absence to change quickly into sleep pants and a t-shirt, then claimed the far side of the bed, the side that had been his since Sarah died. When Elena emerged in sleep clothes of her own, soft pants and a faded NYU sweatshirt that looked older than their arrangement, she hesitated before sliding under the covers on the other side. They lay there in the darkness, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. "Today went well," Elena said finally. "Your family bought it completely. Too well. My mother's already planning our future together. I'm sorry, I tried to temper expectations when the bridesmaids asked about proposals. You handled that perfectly. You handled everything perfectly." Daniel stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from the curtains play across the plaster. "Maybe too perfectly. You're very good at this." "At what?" "Being whoever people need you to be." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" "I don't know. An observation, maybe. You fit into my family like you were made for it, and I know that's what we're paying you for, but it makes me wonder what's real and what's performance. Does it matter? Doesn't it?" He felt her shift in the bed, turning toward him, though he couldn't see her face in the dark. "I meant what I said at dinner, if that's what you're asking. About you being a good father, about Chloe being remarkable, about your mother being kind. Those things were real. And the rest? The rest is me doing my job." But her voice carried something that suggested even she wasn't entirely convinced of that distinction. Daniel turned toward her, and in the ambient light from the window, he could just make out her profile, the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the vulnerability she let show when she thought no one was really looking. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Depends on the question." "Why did you really say yes to this? And don't tell me it's just for the money. There are easier ways to earn $5,000 than pretending to date a widower and his perceptive daughter." Elena sighed, and Daniel heard years of weight in that single exhale. "Because when you called that first day and explained what you needed, I recognized the desperation. I've been there, needing people to believe you're okay when you're falling apart inside, doing whatever it takes to maintain the illusion. And I thought, Maybe this time I could help someone else hold it together instead of just managing my own collapse. The honesty stole his breath. And has it worked? Helping me hold it together? I don't know. Ask me on Sunday. They fell silent again, but it was different now. Less awkward, more companionable. The weight of shared understanding settling between them like an agreement neither had spoken aloud. Thank you, Daniel said into the darkness. For today. For all of this. You're welcome. Elena's voice was soft, already edged with sleep. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Elena. He lay awake long after her breathing had evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about performance and reality, about the lies people told themselves to make it through the day, about the unexpected comfort of a stranger who saw through all his carefully constructed walls, and about the fact that somewhere in the last few days, this arrangement had started to feel like something else entirely, something real, something dangerous, something he wasn't sure how to walk away from when Sunday came. Morning came too early, sunlight streaming through the gauze curtains and painting the room in shades of gold that felt too cheerful for how little sleep Daniel had gotten. He'd spent most of the night hyper-aware of Elena's presence beside him, the way she curled toward the center of the bed in sleep, the soft sound of her breathing, the warmth that radiated from her side of the mattress. When he'd finally dozed off sometime after 3, his dreams had been confused tangles of past and present, Sarah and Elena, reality and performance bleeding together until he couldn't tell which was which. Now Elena was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the balcony with a cup of coffee, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, less guarded. Daniel watched her through the French doors for a moment before she sensed his presence and turned. There's more coffee, she said, gesturing to the small pot on the balcony table. I called room service. Hope that's okay. It's perfect. Daniel poured himself a cup and joined her outside. The garden stretched below them, already bustling with staff making final preparations for the ceremony. What time is it? Just past 7. I'm an early riser. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the estate come to life. It should have been awkward, the morning after sharing a bed, the weight of another day of pretending ahead of them. But instead it felt almost peaceful. Can I ask you something? Elena said finally. Seems fair, since I asked you something last night. When you think about Sarah, do you think about who she was or who you were when you were with her? The question landed with unexpected weight. Daniel set down his coffee cup, needing a moment to consider. Both, I think. They're tangled together. She made me better, more patient, more present, more willing to take risks. Without her, I feel like I've reverted to some lesser version of myself. Like I lost not just her, but the parts of me that she brought out. Or maybe, Elena said carefully, those parts are still there. You just haven't had a reason to access them. Grief doesn't erase who we are, Daniel. It just makes it harder to remember. Before he could respond, Chloe appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a sleep-tangled mess. Why are you both awake so early? She asked, rubbing her eyes. It's Saturday. Saturdays are for sleeping in and pancakes. Big day today, Daniel reminded her. The wedding's at 3. Chloe groaned dramatically and flopped onto the couch. Do I have to wear tights? Tights are torture devices disguised as clothing. Yes, you have to wear tights, Daniel said, but he was smiling. It's part of the fancy dress protocol. Protocol is just a word grown-ups use when they want to make something sound important instead of just annoying. But Chloe was grinning too, her morning grumpiness more performance than genuine complaint. Elena laughed, a real laugh that transformed her whole face. You know what? She's got a point. Most protocols are just socially accepted forms of torture. Thank you. Chloe sat up, vindicated. See, Daddy? Elena gets it. They ordered breakfast, actual pancakes for Chloe, along with eggs and fruit for the adults, and ate together on the balcony while the day grew warmer around them. Daniel watched his daughter and Elena talk about dinosaurs and whether Stegosaurus could have survived in modern climates, and felt something dangerous unfurling in his chest. This ease, this comfort, it was starting to feel less like an arrangement and more like something he could get used to. That was the problem. By noon, the hotel had transformed into controlled chaos. Bridesmaids rushed through hallways in various states of dress. Groomsmen gathered in clusters comparing cufflinks. Family members arrived in waves of perfume and expensive fabric. Daniel retreated to the suite to get ready, grateful for the temporary escape from the social demands. He'd just finished with his tie, a process that required 3 attempts and a YouTube tutorial, when Elena emerged from the bathroom and whatever breath Daniel had left in his lungs simply vanished. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, simple in cut but stunning in execution, the fabric skimming her frame in ways that suggested rather than displayed. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the curve of her neck, and she'd done something subtle with makeup that made her eyes seem impossibly dark. "Is it too much?" Elena asked, misreading his silence. "I wasn't sure what qualified as appropriate for black tie but not too formal." "It's perfect," Daniel managed. "You look perfect." Something flickered across her face, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Chloe appeared then, transformed by her grandmother's efforts into something almost unrecognizable. The fancy dress, the tights she'd complained about, her hair styled in a way that made her look older than 7. She struck a pose. "Grandma says I look like a princess. I told her princesses are an outdated social construct, but she said I could be a dinosaur princess if I wanted, which is actually a good compromise." "You look beautiful, Chloe Bear," Daniel said, his throat tight. "I know, Grandma's very good at this stuff." She looked at Elena critically. "You look beautiful too. Daddy's staring at you like he forgets how words work." "Chloe," Daniel warned, but Elena was laughing again. "That's the best compliment I've gotten in years," she said, crouching down to Chloe's level. "Thank you for being honest." "I'm always honest. It's my best and worst quality, according to Ms. Peterson." They made their way down to the ceremony space, a manicured lawn transformed into something from a fairy tale, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch dripping with flowers at the altar. The afternoon sun filtered through strategically placed trees, creating patterns of light and shadow that made everything look slightly unreal. Daniel's family had claimed the front rows, and Linda waved them over with maternal urgency. They slid into seats beside his parents, Chloe between Daniel and Elena, and Daniel felt the weight of his father's approving glance, his mother's satisfied smile. They thought this was real. They thought he'd finally moved on, found someone new, started healing. The lie sat heavy in his stomach. The ceremony began with music, a string quartet playing something classical and moving. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle in their coordinated dresses, followed by Rachel on their father's arm, radiant in white lace, her face glowing with a happiness so pure it almost hurt to witness. Daniel watched his sister marry Tom Chen with words that promised forever, and felt the past crash into the present with devastating force. He remembered his own wedding, smaller, simpler, but filled with the same kind of certainty. He remembered Sarah's hands in his, the way she'd smiled up at him like he was her whole world, the absolute conviction that they'd have decades together. Life had other plans. His breath hitched, and suddenly he was fighting back emotion he hadn't expected. Grief arriving uninvited to a celebration, the sharp awareness that Sarah should be here, that she should be the one sitting beside him in a beautiful dress, that everything was wrong even though it looked right. Elena's hand found his. Not performative, not for show. The guests were all watching Rachel and Tom. No one was looking at them. She just took his hand and held it, her fingers threading through his, offering anchor without drawing attention. Daniel held on tighter than he probably should have. The ceremony concluded with a kiss and applause, and the newlyweds recessed back down the aisle in a shower of flower petals and joy. The guests rose, transitioning into cocktail hour mode, conversations resuming at party volume. "You okay?" Elena asked quietly, still holding his hand. "Yeah, just, it brought back memories. Good memories or hard memories?" "Both, always both." He squeezed her fingers once before releasing them, aware they needed to maintain some public propriety. "Thank you for the hand-holding. Anytime." They found Chloe, who'd attached herself to cousin Marcus and was enthusiastically explaining the difference between Jurassic and Cretaceous period flora to a boy who looked simultaneously bored and intimidated. Daniel extracted his daughter gently and steered them all toward the cocktail hour space, another section of garden, another display of wealth and taste. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of champagne and small talk. Daniel introduced Elena to more relatives, accepted congratulations on his relationship from people who meant well, and watched his pretend girlfriend charm everyone she met with an ease that made his chest ache. She was so good at this. Too good. And he couldn't tell anymore what was performance and what was real. At one point, cornered by his Uncle Frank, who wanted to discuss market trends, Daniel lost track of Elena entirely. When he finally spotted her again, she was sitting on a garden bench with Chloe, both of them examining something in Chloe's hands. A caterpillar, he realized as he got closer, bright green and fuzzy. "This is a Cecropia moth caterpillar," Chloe was explaining with the confidence of someone who'd clearly memorized this information recently. "They're native to North America and they eat maple leaves mostly, but sometimes other stuff too. In a few weeks, this one will make a cocoon, and then it'll be a moth with wings this big." She spread her hands wide. "That's incredible," Elena said, and she sounded genuinely fascinated. "What happens to it after it becomes a moth?" "It lives for about 2 weeks. Doesn't even eat. It just flies around and finds a mate and lays eggs, and then it dies. Which is kind of sad, but also kind of beautiful. Like, its whole purpose is just to become something else and make more somethings." Elena looked at this caterpillar in Chloe's palm with something like wonder. Transformation and legacy. That's a pretty profound lesson from something so small. "Everything teaches you stuff if you pay attention," Chloe said wisely. "That's what Daddy says." Daniel felt his heart clench. He didn't remember saying that, but apparently Chloe had been listening to his offhand philosophizing more carefully than he'd realized. He approached the bench and both looked up at him with matching expressions of concentration. "We found a caterpillar," Chloe announced. "We're going to release it near the maple trees so it has food." "Sounds like a good plan." They walked together to the edge of the garden, Chloe carefully transferring the caterpillar to a low branch, watching until it started its slow crawl toward leaves. Then she turned to Elena with sudden seriousness. "Can I ask you a question? A real one?" "Of course." "Are you still pretending, or is some of it real now?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Daniel froze, waiting for Elena's answer, suddenly desperate to hear it himself. Elena knelt down so she was eye level with Chloe. "Do you want the truth?" "Always." "I don't know anymore. I came here planning to pretend for a weekend and then leave. But you and your dad, you've made that harder than I expected. Some of it's still pretend. Some of it started to feel real. And I'm not sure I know where the line is anymore." It was the most honest thing she'd said since they'd met, and Daniel felt it reverberate through his entire body. Chloe nodded slowly, processing. "That's okay. Not knowing is okay. I didn't know either. But I think maybe the real parts are the ones that feel scary. Pretend stuff doesn't scare you because it doesn't matter. Real stuff scares you because it does." "When did you get so wise?" Elena asked softly. "I've always been wise. Adults just don't usually listen to kids." Chloe stood up and brushed off her dress. "Come on, we should go back before Grandma sends out a search party." She skipped ahead, leaving Daniel and Elena standing by the maple trees, the weight of the conversation settling between them. "She's right, you know," Daniel said quietly, "about the real stuff being scary." "I know." Elena looked at him, and her walls were down, her expression open and vulnerable. "This was supposed to be simple. I was supposed to play a role for a weekend, collect my money, and leave. But nothing about this feels simple anymore." "What does it feel like?" "Dangerous, complicated, like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't take back." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm evening. "I don't do real connections, Daniel. I don't let people in. It's safer that way." "I know the feeling. I've been living in safe for 4 years. And how's that working out for you?" "Terribly. The admission came easier than it should have. I'm lonely and I'm scared, and I'm so tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not." "So what do we do?" Elena asked. "Tomorrow's Sunday. We're supposed to go back to our separate lives and pretend this never happened." "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I want. That's the problem. I've spent so long not wanting anything that now that I don't know how to handle it." Daniel stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her pulse fluttered at her throat. "Elena?" "There you are!" Rachel's voice cut through the moment like a knife. She appeared from around a hedge, slightly disheveled from hours of celebration, her face flushed with happiness and champagne. "We're about to do the first dance. Come on, you have to see this. Tom's been practicing and he's still terrible, but in the most adorable way possible." She grabbed both their hands and pulled them back toward the reception tent, chattering about wedding details, and the moment was lost. But as they walked, Elena's hand stayed in Daniel's, and he wondered if she even realized she was still holding it. The reception tent was a masterpiece of design, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace, tables draped in fabric that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage, flowers everywhere. The newlyweds took the floor for their first dance, and Tom was indeed terrible. But Rachel just laughed and let him spin her anyway, and the whole room watched with the kind of collective affection that made even Daniel's cynical heart soften. When the song ended and the floor opened to everyone, Daniel's father appeared at his elbow. "May I?" Robert asked, gesturing to Elena. "Of course." Daniel watched his father lead Elena onto the dance floor, watched them start an easy conversation as they swayed to the music. His mother materialized beside him, slipping her arm through his. "She's wonderful, honey. Truly wonderful." "Mom, I know you're going to tell me it's early, that you're taking things slow, all of that. But I can see the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you. That's not something you can fake." Daniel felt the guilt rise like bile in his throat. If only his mother knew how wrong she was, how everything she was seeing was carefully constructed, performed, purchased. Except it wasn't anymore, was it? Elena had said it herself. She didn't know where the line was between pretend and real. And Daniel was beginning to suspect he didn't either. "Dance with me," Linda said, pulling him onto the floor before he could protest. They moved into the waltz rhythm, and Daniel let his mother lead, the way he had at his own wedding when they danced to the same song. "I was worried about you," Linda said quietly. "After Sarah. You shut down so completely, threw yourself into taking care of Chloe, and you never let yourself grieve properly. Never let yourself be anything but strong." Someone had to be strong for Chloe. And who was strong for you? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. "When I saw you tonight during the ceremony," Linda continued, "I saw you crying. Just a little, but I saw it. And Elena was holding your hand. Not because people were watching, no one was looking at you. She was holding your hand because you needed it. That's what partners do, Daniel. They hold your hand when nobody's watching." The observation cut deeper than his mother could have known. Because she was right, Elena had reached for him when there was no performance value, no audience to convince. She'd just offered comfort because he'd needed it. "I don't want you to rush anything," Linda said, "but I also don't want you to let fear stop you from being happy again. You deserve that. Chloe deserves to see you happy." The song ended and his mother kissed his cheek and returned him to the edge of the dance floor. Daniel stood there, watching couples spin and sway, watching his sister dance with her new husband, watching his father twirl Elena with surprising grace. And he thought about what Chloe had said, that real stuff scared you because it mattered, that pretend stuff was safe precisely because it had no stakes. Elena caught his eye across the dance floor, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition, or the shared awareness that they'd crossed some invisible boundary and there was no going back. When the song changed to something slower, Elena excused herself from Robert and made her way back to Daniel. "Your father is an excellent dancer," she said. "Years of practice. My mother insisted on lessons before their wedding." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the music swelling around them before Elena extended her hand. "Dance with me?" It wasn't really a question. Daniel took her hand and led her onto the floor, pulling her close. Closer than was strictly necessary for a casual dance. Close enough that he could smell whatever subtle scent she wore, feel the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her dress. They moved together with an ease that surprised him, their bodies finding a rhythm without discussion or negotiation. Elena's hand rested on his shoulder, his hand at her waist, and it felt both entirely new and strangely familiar. "Your family loves you very much," Elena said softly. "They do. Which makes lying to them harder." Are we still lying? The question landed with all its weight. Daniel met her eyes and found her watching him with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. I don't know, he admitted. Are we? I told Chloe I didn't know where the line was between pretend and real. That was true. It feels like something I didn't plan for. Something I don't know how to handle. Elena, Daniel started, but the words tangled in his throat. How could he explain that she'd somehow become essential in the span of days? That the idea of Sunday, of going back to his empty house and lonely routine felt unbearable now? That he was terrified of what he was feeling precisely because it mattered? I'm scared, he said finally, of wanting this, of wanting you, of what it means if this is real. Me too. Her voice was barely audible over the music. I've spent years making sure nothing was real, making sure I could walk away from everything without it costing me. And now you can't walk away? Now I don't want to, and that's terrifying. They swayed in silence, the confession hanging between them like a promise neither was ready to make. Around them, other couples danced, oblivious to the small revolution happening in the center of the floor. The song ended. The band transitioned into something upbeat, and the moment dissolved. They stepped apart, the distance feeling like miles instead of inches. I need some air, Elena said. I'll come with you. They slipped out of the tent into the gardens, now lit with fairy lights and lanterns, transformed into something magical by darkness and design. Other guests wandered the paths, but Daniel guided Elena to a quieter corner near the fountain Chloe had explored earlier. What are we doing, Daniel? Elena asked, her back to him, staring at the water. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, help you get through a weekend, get paid, go our separate ways. When did it become this? I think it became this the moment you crouched down to Chloe's level and treated her like a person instead of a child. Or maybe when you held my hand during the ceremony, or when you told her the truth about not knowing what was real anymore. He moved to stand beside her. I don't know when it happened, but it did. And tomorrow? Her voice cracked on the word. Tomorrow, we're supposed to drive home and pretend this never happened. You pay me the rest of my money and I disappear from your life. That was the deal. Deals can be renegotiated. Can they? She finally turned to face him, and in the low light, he could see the tears she was fighting. What are you offering, Daniel? Because I need to know. I need to know if this is real, or if I'm projecting something onto a situation that was never meant to be more than a job. Daniel took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the way the next words out of his mouth would shape everything that came after. I'm offering, he started, then stopped. What was he offering? A relationship with a widow who hadn't dated in 4 years? A ready-made family with a too perceptive 7-year-old? A life built around grief and caution and the constant fear of loss? But also, coffee on balconies and shared silence. Someone who saw through his defenses and chose to stay anyway. A woman who made his daughter laugh and held his hand when no one was watching. I'm offering whatever you want this to be, he said finally. If you want to walk away tomorrow, I'll pay you and thank you and let you go. If you want to try to see if this thing between us is real, then I'm offering that too, all of it. The mess and the complications and the scared single father who doesn't know what he's doing. And Chloe? Elena's voice was shaking now. What do we tell Chloe if we try and it doesn't work? She's already attached. If this falls apart, then it falls apart and we deal with it together. Elena, I can't promise you perfect. I can't promise you easy. But I can promise you honest. And I can promise that whatever this is, it's worth trying to figure out. Elena closed her eyes, tears finally escaping down her cheeks. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in. Neither do I. Not anymore. Not since Sarah. Daniel reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. This is crazy. We barely know each other. I know you take your coffee black. I know you're fluent in 4 languages. I know you see people, really see them, in a way most people don't. I know you treated my daughter with kindness when you could have just been professional. I know you held my hand when I was falling apart. Maybe that's enough to start with. Elena opened her eyes, and they were full of fear and hope in equal measure. What if I'm not good at this? What if I mess everything up? What if you don't? She laughed through her tears, a broken sound that was somehow also hopeful. You're asking me to take a massive leap here. I know. I'm taking it too. They stood there in the fairy-lit garden, the sound of the reception a distant backdrop, two people who'd been pretending for so long they'd forgotten what real felt like. And in that moment, Daniel made a choice. He stepped forward, cupped Elena's face gently in his hands, and kissed her. It was soft, tentative, asking rather than demanding. Elena froze for a heartbeat, and then she was kissing him back, her hands coming up to grip his jacket, pulling him closer, 4 years of loneliness and fear dissolving in the space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. "This is real," she whispered. "This is real, and I'm terrified, and I want it anyway." "Me too," Daniel said. "All of the above." They stood there, holding each other in a garden lit by borrowed light, and for the first time in 4 years, Daniel felt like he might actually be ready for whatever came next. Not because the fear was gone, but because for the first time the hope was stronger. They stayed in the garden until the night air turned cool and the reception sound shifted from celebration to winding down. When they finally returned to the tent, hand in hand now, without pretense, Daniel's mother caught his eye from across the room and smiled, a knowing, hopeful smile that made his chest tighten with equal parts guilt and possibility. Chloe had fallen asleep at their table, her head resting on folded arms, the long day finally catching up with her. Daniel lifted his daughter carefully, and she stirred just enough to wrap her arms around his neck. "Is it time to go?" she mumbled against his shoulder. "Yeah, sweetheart, time to go." Elena gathered Chloe's shoes and small purse, and together they made their way through the remaining guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Daniel's family already treating Elena like she belonged. Rachel hugged them both goodbye, whispering to Daniel, "I'm so happy for you," with such genuine warmth that he almost confessed everything right there. But he didn't, because maybe the lie had become truth. Maybe that's what happened when you pretended something hard enough. It stopped being pretend. Back in the Gardenia suite, they went through the familiar routine of getting Chloe ready for bed, working together with the kind of unspoken coordination that suggested practice they didn't actually have. Chloe was too tired for her usual questions, accepting goodnight kisses from both of them before burrowing under the covers with her stuffed triceratops. Daniel stood in the doorway watching her sleep, Elena beside him, and felt the weight of what they'd started pressing against his ribs. "We need to talk," Elena said softly once they'd closed Chloe's door. "Really talk. About what happens now." They settled on the balcony again, the night sky clear and full of stars that seemed impossible this close to the city. Daniel poured them both water from the minibar, his hands needing something to do. "I meant what I said in the garden," he started. "About wanting to try. About this being real." "I know, I meant it too." Elena turned her glass in her hands, watching the way light refracted through it. "But we need to be practical. We need to think about what this actually looks like. You have a life, a daughter, a routine. I have—" She paused, and Daniel heard the vulnerability in that pause. "I have a studio apartment and a career built on keeping people at arm's length. I don't know how to integrate into someone else's life. You've been doing it all weekend. For a weekend. That's different than permanently. What happens when the performance is over and you realize I'm just me? What happens when Chloe gets tired of having me around? What happens when the reality doesn't match the fantasy we built in a garden?" Daniel set down his glass and turned to face her fully. "Elena, listen to me. I'm not operating under any fantasies here. I know this is complicated. I know we're both damaged and scared and probably making a terrible decision. But I also know that I feel more alive when you're around than I have in 4 years. I know Chloe lights up when she talks to you. I know that going back to how things were before feels impossible now. But what if I hurt her? What if I hurt you?" Elena's voice cracked. "I don't have a great track record with relationships. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except honest. That's all I've ever needed." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. "We don't have to have it all figured out tonight. We just have to agree that we want to try. The rest, we can figure out as we go." Elena was quiet for a long time, her fingers tangled with his, her gaze fixed on some point in the darkness beyond the balcony. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother used to tell me that love was about sacrifice, that you gave up pieces of yourself to make room for someone else. And I watched her sacrifice everything, her career, her friends, her sense of self, all for a man who used that sacrifice as a weapon. She looked at Daniel then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm terrified of becoming her, of losing myself in someone else's life. Then don't, Daniel said simply. Keep your apartment, keep your work, keep whatever parts of your life make you who you are. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything, Elena. I'm asking you to add something, to add us to your life, not replace your life with us. And if it's too much, if I need space or time then you take it. We're not teenagers, Elena. We can have an adult relationship with boundaries and communication and respect for each other's needs. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. She studied him with those dark, assessing eyes that had seen through him from the start. You make it sound so reasonable. That's because it is reasonable. The unreasonable part is expecting ourselves to have all the answers right now. We take it slow. We see each other when we can. We let Chloe adjust. We figure out what works and what doesn't, and if somewhere along the way we realize it's not working, we're honest about that too. And the money? Elena pulled the envelope from her purse, the one he'd given her that first day in the coffee shop. You paid me to pretend. I can't take this if this is real now. Keep it. You earned it. You showed up, you were professional, you helped me get through this weekend. That was the deal. Daniel, keep it, he said firmly. What happens from here is separate from what we agreed to. That was business. This, he gestured between them. This is something else entirely. Elena looked at the envelope, then at him, conflict playing across her features. Finally, she set it down on the table between them. Okay, but I want to be clear. From this point forward, nothing is transactional. I'm not here because you're paying me. I'm here because I choose to be, because I want to be. Agreed. They sat in silence for a while, the commitment settling around them like a promise. Daniel felt the fear still, sharp and present, but beneath it was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. So what now? Elena asked eventually. Now we go to sleep. Tomorrow we drive home. And then we see what happens next. Maybe dinner on Tuesday. I could cook, or we could order in. Chloe would love to show you her complete dinosaur collection, which we only got a partial tour of. Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes this time. Dinner on Tuesday sounds perfect. They moved inside, the night growing late, and prepared for bed with less awkwardness than the night before. When they slid under the covers, Elena didn't stay on her far edge of the mattress. Instead, she moved closer, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her against his chest. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? For seeing me. For not letting me hide. For being brave enough to want this, even though it's scary. Daniel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. Thank you for the same. He fell asleep like that, holding Elena, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't dream about the past. He dreamed about possibility. Sunday morning arrived with a gentle insistence, sunlight creeping across the bed, pulling them slowly toward wakefulness. Daniel woke first, finding Elena still tucked against him, her face peaceful in sleep. He watched her for a moment, marveling at how quickly this had become familiar, how right it felt. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly, confusion flickering across her features before memory returned. When she saw him watching, she smiled, shy and real. Morning, she murmured. Morning. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sleep okay? Better than I have in years. She stretched, cat-like, then settled back against him. We should probably get up. Checkout is at 11. Probably, he agreed, but neither of them moved. They stayed like that for another 20 minutes, neither quite ready to let the bubble of this moment burst, until Chloe's voice called from the other room. Daddy, are we going home today? Can we stop for pancakes on the way? Reality reasserted itself. They got up, packed their bags, went through the morning routines. Chloe was quieter than usual, watching Daniel and Elena with thoughtful eyes, processing whatever changes she sensed but hadn't yet articulated. Downstairs, they found Daniel's family gathered for a farewell brunch. Linda pulled Elena into another hug, making her promise to come to dinner soon. Rachel cornered Daniel to gush about how perfect Elena was, how happy she seemed, how glad Rachel was that Daniel had finally found someone. His father shook Elena's hand with the kind of approval that carried weight. Through it all, Daniel felt the guilt and the relief warring in his chest. The lie that had become truth. The performance that had transformed into reality. He couldn't quite reconcile all of it, so he just accepted it, letting the contradictions exist without trying to resolve them. They said their goodbyes and loaded the car, Chloe settling in the back with her book and Mr. Whisker's travel tank. As they pulled away from the Rosewood estate, Daniel caught Elena's eye, and she reached over to rest her hand on his knee. A small gesture of solidarity, of connection, of whatever this was becoming. The drive home was quieter than the drive up. Chloe read for a while, then dozed off, exhausted by the weekend. Elena stared out the window at the passing landscape, occasionally glancing at Daniel with small smiles that suggested she was processing everything too. Halfway home, she finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you think about the future now, what do you see?" Daniel considered the question carefully. A week ago, the future had been a flat line extending into infinity, more of the same, day after day, getting Chloe through childhood and hoping he didn't mess her up too badly. Now? "I see Tuesday dinners," he said. "I see Chloe teaching you about velociraptors and you actually being interested. I see coffee on Saturday mornings, and maybe you staying over sometimes if you want to. I see taking things slow but actually taking them, instead of just standing still and calling it safety. What about the hard stuff? What about when I need space, or when Chloe has a bad day and doesn't want me around? Or when you wake up missing Sarah and resenting me for not being her?" Then we talk about it. We deal with it. "Elena, I'm not expecting this to be easy. I'm expecting it to be real. Real includes the hard stuff." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I see Tuesday dinners too. And maybe you coming to my apartment sometimes, so Chloe can see that I have my own life that I'm inviting you into, not just inserting myself into yours. I see us figuring out how to be two independent people who choose to be together, instead of two desperate people clinging to each other to avoid being alone." That sounds healthy and terrifying. Everything good is both. They stopped for pancakes at a diner off the highway, Chloe's request finally being honored. Over stacks of blueberry pancakes and bacon, Chloe set down her fork and looked at both of them with serious eyes. "So are you two actually together now? Like, for real? Not for pretend?" Daniel and Elena exchanged glances. They'd known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it easier. "We're trying to figure that out," Daniel said carefully. "What we started this weekend as pretend, it became something real. But we're taking it slow, making sure it works for everyone." "Including me?" Chloe asked. "Especially you," Elena said. "Your dad and I talked about this. Nothing happens that makes you uncomfortable. If you need us to slow down, or if you need space, or if you just need to talk about how you're feeling, all of that is okay. You get a vote in this." Chloe absorbed this, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of bacon. "What if I vote yes, but then I change my mind later? Can I unvote?" "Absolutely," Daniel assured her. "This isn't a one-time decision. You can always tell us how you're feeling." "Okay." Chloe nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then I vote yes. I like Elena. She's smart, and she doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid, and she held Daddy's hand when he was sad at the wedding. Those are all good qualities in a person." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Those are very good qualities." "Plus," Chloe added, returning to her pancakes, "Mr. Whiskers likes her, and he's an excellent judge of character." Elena laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "High praise from Mr. Whiskers." They finished breakfast and continued the drive home, the conversation lighter now that the major questions had been addressed. When they finally pulled up to Daniel's house, the familiarity of it struck him with unexpected force. This was his life. This small house on a quiet street, the yard that needed mowing, the kitchen where he made Chloe's breakfast every morning. And now Elena might become part of it. The thought was both wonderful and terrifying. They unloaded the car together, and Elena helped carry bags inside even though her own apartment was across town. Chloe immediately disappeared to her room to reunite with her full dinosaur collection, leaving the adults in the living room with the question of what happened next. I should probably go, Elena said, though she didn't move toward the door. Let you both settle back in. Get back to normal. Or, Daniel countered, you could stay for a while. Help Chloe set up Mr. Whisker's tank. Maybe have dinner with us. Normal can include you now, if you want it to. Elena smiled, and he could see the fear and the want warring in her expression. I want it to, but I need to go home at some point, process everything. Make sure I'm not just caught up in the emotion of the weekend. That's fair. How about you stay for a couple hours, then head home? And we'll confirm Tuesday for dinner? Tuesday for dinner, she agreed. Here or my place? Let's say here. Chloe will be more comfortable, and I actually can cook when I'm making stuff I know. Nothing fancy, but edible. Edible sounds perfect. She did stay, helping Chloe restore Mr. Whiskers to his regular tank, listening to detailed explanations of each dinosaur's characteristics, fitting into the space of their home with an ease that made Daniel's heart ache. But when evening approached, she gathered her things and prepared to leave. At the door, Chloe hugged her goodbye. A real hug. Not the polite kind, the kind that suggested Elena had passed some invisible test. See you Tuesday, Chloe said. I'm going to prepare a presentation about theropods. You'll need to be ready to take notes. I'll bring my best notebook, Elena promised. After Chloe retreated to her room, Daniel walked Elena to her car. The evening air was cool, the neighborhood quiet, and they stood in the driveway not quite ready to say goodbye. This weekend was, Elena started, then stopped. I don't have words for what this weekend was. Me neither. Transformative, terrifying, the best worst decision I've ever made. All of the above. She leaned against her car, looking up at him. Daniel, I need you to know, I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to need space and then panic that I've needed too much space. I'm going to overthink everything and probably try to sabotage this when it gets too real. That's what I do. Okay? And I'm going to compare you to Sarah sometimes, even though that's not fair. I'm going to be overprotective of Chloe and probably push you away when I get scared. I'm going to have days where the grief hits out of nowhere and I shut down. That's what I do. So we're both disasters. Absolutely. But maybe we're disasters who are willing to work on it. Elena reached up and cupped his face, pulling him down into a kiss that was soft and sweet and held the promise of Tuesday and all the days after. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Tuesday, she whispered. Tuesday, he confirmed. He watched her drive away, standing in the driveway until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Then he went back inside to find Chloe in the kitchen, making herself a snack with the kind of focus that suggested she was thinking hard about something. You really like her, Chloe observed, not looking up from her apple slices. I do. Like more than like love-like. Daniel leaned against the counter, considering how to answer. I think I could love her, eventually, if we do this right. What about Mom? The question was quiet, careful, and Daniel heard the fear underneath it, the fear that loving someone new meant forgetting someone old. He pulled Chloe into a hug, holding her tight. Loving Elena doesn't mean I stop loving Mom. Love isn't a finite resource, Chloe Bear. You don't run out. The love I have for your mom, that's always going to be there. It's part of who I am. But there's also room for new love, different love. Both can exist. Like how I love you and I loved Mom, but they're different kinds of love. Exactly like that. Chloe nodded against his chest, processing. Okay, that makes sense. I don't want to forget her. We won't. We'll never forget her. She's part of our story, part of what made us who we are. Elena doesn't erase that. She adds a new chapter. A new chapter, Chloe repeated, testing the words. I like that. Stories are better when they keep going instead of just stopping. Daniel kissed the top of her head, marveling again at his daughter's wisdom. Yeah, they are. That night, after Chloe was asleep, Daniel found himself in his bedroom staring at the closet that still held Sarah's clothes. The blue cardigan, the red dress, the coat with the buttons. All the pieces Chloe had asked to keep, and all the rest hanging there like ghosts. He thought about what Chloe had said at the Rosewood estate. that Mommy would like her clothes going to people who needed them better than just hanging there. He thought about new chapters and moving forward, and the fact that honoring the past didn't mean living in it. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd start packing up the clothes. Not throwing away memories, just making room for new ones. Tuesday arrived with surprising speed. Daniel spent Monday at work barely able to concentrate, fielding amused comments from Margaret about his distraction, which he neither confirmed nor denied. He left early to grocery shop, actually planning a menu instead of his usual last-minute scrambling. Chloe helped him clean the house with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, narrating her preparations for Elena's visit like she was hosting a visiting dignitary. The living room needs to look welcoming but not too clean because too clean looks fake, she announced, adjusting a throw pillow. And we should have good snacks, but not too many snacks, because then it looks like we're trying too hard. When did you become an expert on hospitality? Daniel asked, amused. I observe. It's a skill. She stood back to survey their work. Do you think Elena will stay for dinner or just run away when she realizes we're kind of weird? We're not weird. We're unique. That's what weird people say when they don't want to admit they're weird. At 6:30, the doorbell rang. Daniel's heart kicked in his chest, an actual physiological response to the simple fact of Elena's arrival. He opened the door to find her standing there in jeans and a simple sweater, holding a bottle of wine and looking nervous. Hi, she said. Hi. He stepped aside to let her in. You didn't have to bring anything. I know, but I wanted to. She handed him the wine, then noticed Chloe hovering in the living room doorway. Hey, Chloe, ready for that theropod presentation? I've been ready since Sunday, Chloe said seriously. I've prepared visual aids. Dinner was simple, roasted chicken, vegetables, rice, but Daniel had put effort into it, and it showed. They ate at the kitchen table, Chloe monopolizing the conversation with dinosaur facts, Elena asking questions that proved she was actually listening, Daniel watching the two of them interact and feeling something warm and terrifying settle in his chest. After dinner, Chloe gave her promised presentation, complete with drawings she'd made and carefully researched facts. Elena took actual notes, asking follow-up questions, treating the whole thing with a seriousness that made Chloe glow with pride. You're really good with her, Daniel said later, after Chloe had gone to bed and they were sitting on the couch with glasses of wine. She makes it easy. She's genuine. She doesn't play games or test boundaries. She just is who she is. I appreciate that. She learned that from Sarah, the honesty, the directness. I'm more prone to avoidance and overthinking. Elena shifted closer, tucking herself against his side. We all have our coping mechanisms. The important thing is recognizing them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Daniel marveled at how quickly this had become familiar. Elena in his house, on his couch, fitting into the spaces of his life like she'd always been there. I've been thinking, Elena said eventually, about what you said, about taking this slow, seeing how it works. I think I need you to know my real story. Not the sanitized version, the whole thing. Daniel set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully. Okay, I'm listening. Elena took a deep breath, gathering courage. When I left home for college, I swore I'd never be like my mother. Never sacrifice myself for a man, never lose my identity in a relationship. And I was so determined to prove that I could be independent that I pushed everyone away. Anytime someone got close, I'd find a reason to end it. Too clingy, too distant, too something. The truth was, I was just terrified of ending up controlled like she was. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on her wine glass. About 3 years ago, I met someone, Marcus. He was kind, patient, willing to work around my issues, and I let him in, really let him in. For the first time since I'd left home, I let myself be vulnerable with someone. We dated for a year. I started thinking maybe I could do this, maybe I could have a real relationship. Daniel heard the shift in her voice, the hurt creeping in, and he took her hand. He proposed, Elena continued, and I panicked, completely spiraled, because marriage meant commitment, and commitment meant losing myself, and I couldn't do it. So I broke up with him. Told him I wasn't ready, that I needed space, and he begged me to reconsider, told me he'd wait, that we could work through it together. But I was so convinced I was protecting myself that I couldn't hear him. Tears were streaming down her face now. 2 months later, I realized I'd made a mistake. That I'd let my mother's story control my story. That I'd thrown away something real because I was too scared to believe it could be different. So I went to his apartment to tell him, and found him with someone else. She was moving in. They were engaged. He'd moved on completely. Elena, Daniel started, but she shook her head. Let me finish. I was devastated. But more than that, I was angry at myself. Because I'd proven exactly what I was afraid of. That I couldn't sustain a real relationship. That I was broken in some fundamental way. So I leaned into it. Started taking these jobs. Being whoever people needed me to be temporarily. Keeping everything surface level and transactional. It was safer. Simpler. I could control it. She looked at Daniel then, her eyes red but her gaze steady. And then you called. And I thought it would be like every other job. Play a role, collect the money, leave. But you and Chloe, you made it impossible to stay detached. You saw through all my defenses, and now I'm terrified that I'm going to do the same thing again. That I'm going to panic and push you away and lose something real because I don't know how to hold on to it. Daniel pulled her close, holding her while she cried, feeling the weight of her confession and the trust it represented. When her tears finally slowed, he spoke quietly into her hair. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with that. He pulled back enough to see her face. Elena, I can't promise you won't get scared. I can't promise I won't get scared either. But I can promise that if you start to panic, if you feel yourself pulling away, talk to me first. Don't just run. Give me a chance to understand, to work through it with you. Can you do that? I can try, that's all I can promise, that I'll try. That's all either of us can do. Try and keep trying and be honest when it's hard. They held each other on the couch, the house quiet around them, two damaged people choosing to be vulnerable together despite every instinct telling them to protect themselves. Stay tonight, Daniel said softly. Not because of the arrangement, not because you're paid to, but because I want you to. Because waking up next to you felt right, and I'd like to do it again. Elena looked up at him, searching his face. Are you sure? What about Chloe? Chloe already knows we're together, and she voted yes, remember? I think she'd be fine with you being here in the morning. Okay, Elena whispered. Okay, I'll stay. They moved through the evening routines together, Daniel checking that doors were locked, Elena washing their wine glasses, both of them moving around each other with increasing familiarity. In Daniel's bedroom, Elena borrowed a t-shirt to sleep in, and they settled into bed with less hesitation than before. This is real, Elena said into the darkness, more statement than question. This is real, Daniel confirmed. I'm not going to be perfect at it. Neither am I, but we're going to try anyway. She turned in his arms, kissing him with a tenderness that spoke of promises and possibilities, and Daniel kissed her back, letting go of the fear enough to hold on to the hope. The next morning, Chloe found them in the kitchen, making breakfast together, Daniel handling the pancakes, Elena setting the table. And she paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with thoughtful eyes. Is Elena going to be here sometimes in the mornings now? She asked. Sometimes, Daniel confirmed. Is that okay? Chloe considered this seriously. As long as she doesn't try to make me eat healthy breakfast. Daddy lets me have chocolate chips in my pancakes on special occasions. I would never interfere with chocolate chip pancake traditions, Elena said solemnly. Those are sacred. Okay, then it's fine. Chloe climbed onto her chair. Can today be a special occasion? I think Elena staying over counts. Daniel looked at Elena, who nodded with a smile. Yeah, he said, pulling out the chocolate chips. I think it counts. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, and it felt like the beginning of something. Not perfect, not without complications, but real and worth fighting for. Over the following weeks, they found their rhythm. Elena came for dinners, sometimes staying over, sometimes going home to her own apartment. Chloe adjusted with surprising grace, treating Elena's presence as a natural evolution rather than a disruption. Daniel learned Elena's patterns, when she needed space, when she needed closeness, how to read the subtle signs that anxiety was building. Elena learned his too, the days when grief hit unexpectedly, when he needed to talk about Sarah, when Chloe needed extra attention. They talked through the hard moments instead of avoiding them, building trust one honest conversation at a time. 2 months after the wedding, Daniel invited Elena to help with a project he'd been avoiding. Together, they packed up Sarah's remaining clothes, keeping the pieces Chloe wanted, donating the rest to a women's shelter. It was harder than Daniel expected and easier than he feared. Elena didn't try to rush him or minimize the emotion. She just packed boxes and listened when he told stories about Sarah wearing that sweater, that dress, that coat. "You loved her very much," Elena said when they were finishing up. "I did. I still do, in a way." "I know, and I'm not trying to replace that. I'm just hoping there's room for something different alongside it." Daniel pulled her close, holding her in the closet that was slowly emptying, making space for the future. "There is. There's absolutely room." 4 months after the wedding, they met his parents for dinner at a restaurant in the city. Linda and Robert had been overjoyed when Daniel told them the relationship was continuing beyond the wedding weekend, and they'd embraced Elena fully into the family. Over dessert, Robert asked about their plans. Were they thinking long-term? Would they move in together? What about Chloe? "We're taking it at our own pace," Daniel said, Elena's hand in his under the table. "We're figuring out what works for us instead of following some predetermined timeline." "That's wise," Robert said approvingly. "Every relationship is different. The important thing is that you're both happy." "We are," Elena said, and Daniel heard the wonder in her voice, the surprise that happiness was actually possible. 6 months after the wedding, on a quiet Tuesday evening after Chloe had gone to bed, Elena and Daniel sat on his back porch watching fireflies drift through the summer darkness. "I've been thinking," Elena said. "About?" "About moving some of my stuff here. Not all of it. I want to keep my apartment for now. But maybe some clothes, some books, things that make this feel like my space too, not just your space I visit." Daniel felt his heart expand in his chest. "I'd like that. Chloe would like that too." "Yeah?" Elena turned to look at him, vulnerability written across her features. "You're sure? It's a big step." "I'm sure. Elena, I love you. I know we haven't said it yet, but I do. I love you. Not because you're perfect or because you fixed everything, but because you show up. Because you try. Because you let me see the real you, even when it's messy." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I love you too. It terrifies me, but I do." "Good. We can be terrified together." They kissed in the firefly light, two people who'd found each other through desperation and pretense and somehow arrived at something genuine. It wasn't the love story Daniel had with Sarah. It was different, built on different foundations, shaped by different wounds, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth every moment of fear it took to claim it. 1 year after the wedding, they drove back to the Rosewood estate for Rachel and Tom's first anniversary party. This time, there was no pretense, no performance, no lies. Elena came as Daniel's actual girlfriend, integrated into the family, accepted and loved. Chloe introduced her to relatives as Elena, who's basically my bonus person, which was exactly the kind of Chloe logic that made everyone smile. During the party, Daniel found Elena standing by the same fountain where they'd had their breakthrough conversation a year ago. "Thinking about something?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how different this is from last year. How much has changed." "Good different or scary different?" "Both. Always both." She leaned into him. "But mostly good. I never thought I could have this. A real relationship, a family that feels like mine, a life that isn't just about survival. You and Chloe gave me that. You gave us something too. You gave us permission to move forward without guilt, to build something new without erasing what came before." They stood together watching the party, Chloe visible in the crowd talking animatedly to her cousins, Daniel's parents laughing with Tom's parents, Rachel and Tom dancing like newlyweds even though they'd been married a year. "Do you ever think about that first phone call?" Elena asked. "When you were desperate enough to hire a stranger to pretend to love you?" "All the time. Best worst decision I ever made." "Same." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held no more walls, no more defenses. "Thank you for being brave enough to want more than pretend. Thank you for being brave enough to stay." They kissed, and it tasted like promises kept and fears overcome, and the gradual, imperfect, beautiful work of building a life together. Later that night, back in the Gardenia suite, the same room they'd shared a year ago, Daniel, Elena, and Chloe piled onto the balcony with hot chocolate and blankets, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Tell me about the constellations," Chloe demanded. "The real stories, not the baby versions." Elena launched into the mythology of Orion and the Pleiades, her years of classical education coming in handy, while Chloe listened with rapt attention and Daniel held them both, his daughter on one side, his love on the other. This was his life now. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd stumbled into through desperation and discovered was worth keeping. It wasn't perfect. They still had hard days, moments of doubt, conflicts that required resolution. Elena still occasionally panicked when things got too real. Daniel still had days when grief ambushed him without warning. Chloe still asked hard questions about what it all meant, but they showed up for each other. They tried. They chose each other over and over, day after day. And that, Daniel had learned, was what love actually looked like. Not the Hollywood version, not the fairy tale. Just two broken people, three, counting Chloe, deciding that being broken together was better than being alone. Deciding that the risk of loss was worth the reality of connection. Deciding that new chapters didn't erase old ones, they just kept the story going. "Daddy?" Chloe asked, interrupting Elena's constellation story. "Are you happy?" Daniel looked at his daughter, at Elena beside him, at the life they were building together from pieces of loss and hope. "Yeah, Chloe Bear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm happy." "Good. Me too." She snuggled closer. "Now keep going, Elena. I want to hear about Perseus and the Gorgon." Elena continued her story, her voice weaving mythology and starlight into something magical, and Daniel closed his eyes and simply felt it, this moment, this life, this second chance he'd almost been too afraid to take. The arrangement had ended a year ago. The relationship, the real one, built on honesty and choice and the daily decision to show up, was just beginning. And as Daniel sat on that balcony with the two people who made his life worth living, he finally understood what it meant to move forward without leaving the past behind. It meant carrying Sarah's memory while making room for Elena's presence. It meant honoring what was lost while building what was possible. It meant being brave enough to love again, even knowing how much it could hurt to lose. It meant being alive instead of just surviving, and that, he thought, was worth everything.